Hey, remember when Pixar's Gayest Film came out? You know, the one about the two boys that want to run away together across the Italian countryside while sharing a single Vespa seat? The boys that seem just like everyone else, but they're actually hiding their true selves from everyone they care about because they're afraid of what will happen if they're found out. Luca's titular character is a young boy whose curiosities and interests extend beyond the rigid expectations his parents have placed on him. Alberto, a more experienced boy, pushes Luca over a transformational threshold through which he discovers an entirely new way of life, albeit one that he's been raised through his entire adolescence to see as dangerous and wrong. He could just go back, never talk about it again, and no one would ever find out. But he doesn't, does he? Because he's excited by what this new life has to offer. He feels truly alive for what may be the first time. He thinks he can keep this part of himself a secret, but his parents quickly discover his deviancy and are horrified, opting to send him far away to a place dark and miserable in an attempt to fix him. Luca runs away from home. He's cut off from his support network in a way that is many queer folks' greatest fear, and he's left to depend entirely on Alberto, who in many ways also depends entirely on him. They're taken in by a loving family, but there's an explicit threat of the danger they could be in if their true nature is ever discovered, often literally looming overhead. Once again, Luca could just go home and forget about all this, but to him, the threat of shutting away his true self is a much greater threat than the perils he's exposing himself to by pushing forward. He's performing his expected role as a member of the perceived default, but it's made clear that this charade is made at great personal cost. There's even a scene where the fear of exposing himself literally weighs him down in a way that is actively disadvantageous to his goals. At the end of the film, Luca is ultimately forced to make a choice. He can continue this agonizing tightrope walk, or he can permanently surrender his own precarious acceptance by society in order to be his true self with those that he loves. Because this is an animated film for children and not a movie by Darren Aronofsky, Luca's bravery is rewarded. His adoptive father figure Massimo, a physical manifestation of the town's bigotry, has spent enough time with the boys that he's able to see past his own prejudices and accept them, growing and changing as a person. The boys that wanted to escape together on a Vespa are last seen bidding each other a tearful farewell, even including a chase the train scene. Reading Pixar's Luca as a queer coming-of-age story is so obvious to me and many others that I genuinely can't comprehend the thought process of someone that just doesn't see it. Like, I get the value of destigmatizing sincere male friendships. I mean, I spent my teenage years watching Scrubs religiously, and that show's portrayal of Turk and JD's friendship was downright formative for me.
When was the last time you guys saw each other?
This morning, we carpooled.
So don't misinterpret my presentation of Luca as me seeing beautiful sincerity and responding with, "What are you, gay?" My issue is that there are scenes that just don't make proper sense if you refuse to read them as analogy. For example, take the scene that is the film's absolutely gut-wrenching catalyst for its lowest point. Alberto has become toxically jealous of Luca's budding friendship with Julia, and in a truly reprehensible move decides to weaponize his shared closeted status with Luca, hoping that revealing who they are will drive Julia away forever.
What if some were, I don't know, sea monsters?
Sea monsters?
So Alberto reveals himself, expecting that Luca will be forced to choose between them, and that he will win. I was furious at Alberto in this scene, but what happened next made me cry. Luca, who at this point still passes as the heteronormative default, weaponizes his status against Alberto. Instead of joining him, rewarding his awful behavior, or trying to calm Julia down and explain things to her, he panics. He feels his shaky acceptance in society slipping, and in his fear, he turns on his friend, otherizing him. Defeated, Alberto walks alone into the sea as the town's bigots throw spears at him. I'm sorry, but if you watch this scene without thinking about passing, being in the closet, internalized homophobia or transphobia, you might need to watch it again. Maybe it's my own failure of imagination, but I don't think I could craft a more specific analogy if I tried. But hey, that's just a quick movie. What if there was an entire popular anime that was just chock full of this kind of stuff? If we're not on the same page already, I'm about to spend a very long time trying very hard to help you see how this stuff works. Beastars is a manga created by Paru Itagaki that ran from 2016 to 2020, spanning 22 volumes. Its animated adaptation began in 2019, which has so far released 2 seasons that span about half the story. There is also a supplemental anthology series called Beast Complex, which began publication before Beastars and was picked back up after its conclusion, expanding the story's world. My first exposure to this property came when its phenomenal Wild Side intro hit YouTube. In this gem of stop motion by Cyclone Graphics, we watch as a wolf stalks a rabbit through a forest of antlers, silhouetted by the full moon. Just when this predator-prey relationship seems to be coming to its natural end, the tone changes completely. Their eyes widen, as if truly seeing each other for the first time, and they dance. But then the other shoe finally drops as we see the wolf crying in the dark over a spreading pool of blood. This isn't just my personal favorite anime intro of all time, but also the most effective commercial for an animated show that I've ever seen. I had to see more, eagerly anticipating the Netflix premiere for months. And once I reached the end of season 1, I got impatient and just started buying every single volume of the manga, something I haven't done since season 1 of The Walking Dead. I've obviously become a fan at this point. But what is Beastars? Beastars has been called a coming-of-age drama because it focuses on one young wolf as he becomes a man and struggles against the reality of what society has in store for him. It's also been called a shonen because each arc features a villain whom must be punched. But it's also a psychosexual horror thriller where our wolf can't decide whether he wants to have sex with the love interest or devour her whole. But it's also a chill slice-of-life tale where an entire chapter can be devoted exclusively to two characters having dinner together. And none of these descriptions are wrong, exactly. Beastars is, for lack of a better word, fucking bonkers and a joy to read. Along the way, however, myself and many other fans have discovered a whole new side to the story, one which is deeply queer. That's what this video is ultimately going to be about. Beastars is set in a world where every character is an anthropomorphic animal. Furries, basically, if that word tripped you up. The setting has cars, smartphones, and should generally be assumed to be just like modern Earth right up until it very much isn't. The population is split 50-50 between carnivores and herbivores, which is a bit of a problem because this isn't a Gretzko or Odd Taxi or BoJack where the rules are made up and the animals don't matter. In Beastars, nearly all carnivores have this inborn desire to eat meat, an instinct that has not been dulled by the progress of civilization. This isn't great news when no livestock exists because everything is people. The opening scene shows us one such herbivore, an alpaca named Tem, being devoured alive by someone he recognizes. The first 2 seasons take place at Cherryton Academy, an integrated high school for both carnivores and herbivores. Our protagonist is a gray wolf named Legoshi, who seems all timid and misunderstood right up until he suddenly pounces on a rabbit. Overcome by instinct, he struggles not to devour her, and once she escapes, he begins to fall in love. For a while, the jury's out as to whether his feelings for her are real or whether it's all a misguided hunting instinct. Full spoilers up through season 2 or volume 11 starting here. So last chance to hop off this train if you want to experience this beautiful genre-defying horny mess for yourself. I promise that even if you hate it, it'll at least be extremely memorable. Oh, and I do recommend the manga in particular. It takes a few volumes for the art style to really hit its stride, but when it hits, it hits. The anime is incredible in its own way, but it has already skipped over a lot in its adaptation. Also, apparently the 3rd season will be its last, which means it'll be condensing 11 volumes, 50% of the manga, into 12 episodes. I want to stay optimistic, but woof. Spoilers start here. Still with me? Let's recap the story so far. The rabbit's name is Haru, the sole member of the garden club, who is infamously promiscuous. Legoshi keeps finding chances to spend time with her, both out of guilt and curiosity, and a tender relationship begins to develop between them. Legoshi is a stagehand of the drama club, which is also where we find our deuteragonist in the form of Louis, a red deer who is the lead actor. Louis and Haru already have a casual relationship themselves. The drama club is putting on a show called Adler, with Louis as the lead role, but he's forced to step down when he's injured. Bill, a Bengal tiger, takes over the lead role, but he and Legoshi get in a fight on stage when the wolf finds rabbit blood on his person. After the production is over with, the carnivores end up visiting the black market, a technically illegal but widely tolerated place where herbivore meat is sold to placate the carnivore population. Legoshi can't accept the necessity of a place like this, and hopeless train wreck that he is, he sprints through the market in protest. He's captured by Gohin, a panda, and a doctor who watches over the market. Goheen interrogates Legoshi over his relationship with Haru and insists that what Legoshi feels isn't love but predatory instinct. Back at school, Juno joins the drama club, and since she's an attractive female Grey Wolf, everyone, including her, assumes that she'll end up dating Legoshi. Everyone except Legoshi, who balks at her advances. Right when Legoshi's jealousy over Louis and Haru's relationship is at its peak, Haru is kidnapped by the Shishigumi, which is basically the lion Yakuza. The mayor, a lion himself, is content to cover up the incident, and it seems Louis is resigned to accept Haru's death. Legoshi, on the other hand, is furious, punches Louis, and then enlists Goheen's help to rescue Haru. They inexplicably succeed, and as they're leaving, Louis shows up to finish off the leader. Louis is captured by the surviving Shishigumi, who decide to adopt him as their new leader in the hopes that rebranding under an herbivore will boost their business in the black market. Haru and Legoshi can't make it home this late, so they spend the night in a love hotel. They very nearly sleep together, but they're clearly rushing things, so Legoshi settles for confessing that he attacked her back in episode 1. Back at school, the Meteor Festival is in full swing, and Juno makes her big move. She pulls Legoshi on stage to congratulate him, but also to claim him. Haru is hurt, seeing, along with everyone else, that they look like the perfect couple, and decides to pull away. But then Legoshi rejects Juno and chases after Haru, vowing to find a way to make them work. He refuses to let society's expectations get between them. As the new leader of the Shishigumi, Louis is expected to eat meat. His body rejects this, but he refuses to show that he's struggling. Ibuki, his second in command, bonds with him over their shared trauma, caring for him in secret. Cherryton Academy's security guard recruits Legoshi to finally find out who murdered Tem in the prologue. This quickly puts him at odds with the other carnivores. When he's attacked by someone hoping to shut him up, he starts moonlighting with Goheen at the black market in order to train. Legoshi discovers that it was actually Rizzo the bear who devoured Tem, and confronts him, the pair agreeing to settle things once and for all in a fight on New Year's Eve. Accepting that he might actually die, Legoshi asks Louis to witness his final fight. Louis refuses at first, but as the hour draws near, he can't bear to stay away. Louis tells Ibuki he's leaving the Shishigumi to support his friend. Whether out of jealousy or some sense of honor, Ibuki attacks Louis, insisting that no one leaves the Shishigumi. Louis is saved by Free, who Ibuki had commanded to kill him if he ever attacked their boss. Season 2 comes to a close as Legoshi and Louis at last face off against Tem's killer. We'll stop there for now. That's the insanely abridged version of the story, but what makes Beastars special is all of the textured characters, the interesting details, and truly unhinged world building that happens along the way. Here I've given you a framework of the plot, but it's all the stuff that I skipped over that's where we're really going to be spending our time today.
I was just showing him my...
Whoa, hey, I fully support whatever this is. I don't judge.
If you've previously heard of Beastars but never got around to watching it, then you probably only know about this one almost cartoonishly homoerotic scene.
Why don't you take responsibility for who you are? I'm telling you to show me your fangs. Don't hold back now. Quit pretending. Come at me with everything you've got. Bite me!
I first saw it with a room full of people who basically erupted when they realized what they were watching. The overwhelming consensus was essentially, oh, they know what they're doing there. And it's true. This scene is basically the entire reason this video exists. It's the speck of dust that formed the nucleus of this crystal, the load-bearing, horny, gay, furry shipping bait. Load-bearing, I actually wrote that, alright? About a year ago I had the thought that, yeah, that one scene is incredibly homoerotic, but what happens when we look at the whole show through that lens? I was almost joking, but then I ended up walking in circles in my room and ranting at myself like a lunatic for 2 hours until I finally ended my pacing by accidentally breaking my toe on my bed frame. I wish I was joking about that. But before we can get into how incredibly queer Beastars is a series, we've got some contextual groundwork to lay. Some of you will look at all this Legoshi and Louis stuff and think, that's just shipping. And you'd be technically correct, but not correct enough. I agree. Beastars is a manga where every single character appears to be straight, aside from Dom and, well, anyone who gets to see Colette's eyes, apparently. But the point I want to make here is that shipping is itself often not just shipping. I should explain. Shipping is when members of the audience decide that two characters should drink ginger beer together. Sometimes the word is used to refer to which canonical love interest the protagonist should end up with out of the competing candidates, i.e. Haru versus Juno. But I think it's much more often used to refer to the relationships that aren't canonical at all, like Legoshi and Louis. Sure, there's a portion of the audience that seems to basically just throw darts at a board and pair any two characters as if at random. Shout out to the one person who paired Dom and Fudge, apparently. But the most popular ships always seem to be based on something more tangible. There's a palpable sense of chemistry between the characters, an underlying narrative subtext to their non-romantic relationship, or even just straight-up queerbaiting. What I'm saying is that shipping is indicative of a desire path. If you've ever been to a college campus, you've seen these before. There are all those concrete walkways everywhere, but sometimes you just need to go that way, and the path just doesn't go that way, and following the path is going to take you all the way around, so you just cut across the grass. We've all done it, and if a lot of people keep cutting across the same spot, erosion takes hold and the grass gets trampled, and before you know it, there's an obvious trail right there. What we have there is users who are making a connection that's obvious to seemingly everyone but the architects that designed the area, who either missed this path or saw it and refused to build it. The same goes for the most popular ships. They may not be canon, but once hundreds or thousands of people are seeing the same obvious connection, it can't really be dismissed as random noise, can it? Perhaps the oldest and most widely known ship comes from Star Trek, the original series. Trek wouldn't have canonically gay main characters until Star Trek Discovery in 2017, but since the very beginning there have been many fans that have been getting different vibes from Kirk and Spock. Sure, they have a very close and impassioned relationship, but before you think that fans are just arbitrarily grouping any two dudes that interact with each other, consider the episode Amok Time. Right, I have it right here. It's right. I found a physical copy of Amok Time as a prop. Fucking, if that doesn't get a like, I don't even fucking know what you guys want anymore. What is this? It's like, it's not even a VHS. This is older. I grew up with not these. I had VHSs. What is this Betamax? Is that? I've never seen a Betamax before. Does it say it on the thing? I don't know. Some Trekkie died, and all of his VHSs were at a thrift store, and I went through all of them and found the one that has Amok Time on it. So if I play this, I could see the episode I'm talking about. I don't think I can, though. I don't think I can ever play this. In this episode, Spock's body undergoes Ponfar, a condition faced by Vulcan males that means he must mate or he will die. They arrive on Vulcan only for Spock's mate to reject him, but then Spock is able to rid himself of Ponfar not by mating, but by fighting with Kirk. With Spock expelling his urges by turning to another man, the subtext isn't exactly subtle. Come to think of it, there's an old joke from the Plinkett review of the J.J. Abrams Star Trek reboot that stands out to me a lot now. It's really been recontextualized for me over the years.
Anywho, Kirk makes a pass at Uhura, tries to sleep with the Green Lady, and is always craning his neck at anything female that walks by. Establishing that the galactic ladies' man James T. Kirk has a case of the not gays is not too difficult. But then you got Spock.
Every male main character had to be seen being intimate with a woman, ogling one, or in some way showing their attraction to them.
She is one well-endowed lady. I'd like to get my hands on her ample nacelles, if you'll pardon the engineering parlance.
Oh, he said something about tits. That's good enough for me.
A decade ago, I saw this as just like a funny detail, but nowadays I can't help but think that they were actively aware of and feeling insecure about Star Trek's long history with shipping. Suddenly, the strange insistence of pairing Spock with Uhura feels a bit more sinister? For Beastars, let's take a look at Archive of Our Own, which is basically a shipping database at this point. Now, I've never really shipped characters before, so I'm looking at this from the outside in, but there is a logic to the emotions here. While there will always be examples that feel strangely random, come on guys, Tem and Peanut never even met each other, the popular pairings all feel very explainable. In fact, I think you can learn a lot about a show by paying attention to the ships, because they're often written by some of the most dedicated, detail-oriented fans. This means that paying attention to non-canonical interpretations of relationships actually ends up making you notice more about the stuff that was actually in the text all along. Let's explain some of these non-canonical top results. Tao accidentally hurts Kibi, but when he visits him in the hospital, Kibi says he wants them to be able to touch again. Aw, he grabbed his finger. Yahya is so scorned by Gosha leaving him that it's difficult to imagine they weren't canonically a couple before then. Ibuki and Louis have an incredibly intense relationship by the end, which ends in a way that very much feels like, if I can't have you, no one can. Rizzo in particular was definitely just actually in love with Tem. Jack and Legoshi are lifelong friends, and what the fuck? Agatha and Melon? What did Agatha ever do to you people to deserve this? 42 times? Okay, whatever. I don't have time for your problematic faves. I can't get into this. Like all Americans, I love data when it's reinforcing what I'm already saying. So let's break down the numbers. Yes, I spent an hour on AO3 building these spreadsheets. The first thing that stood out to me is that the couples are overwhelmingly queer. Sure, Haru/Legoshi, Juno/Louis, and Haru/Louis all have strong showings, but the rest of the list is overwhelmingly gay. I can see a few reasons for this. For starters, as I hinted at already, a huge number of male-male relationships in this series feel like there's some bait on the line. On top of that, there's always a demand for same-sex relationships that isn't being met by mainstream media. Art is, by its very nature, empathetic, so it can be a struggle to never see yourself represented in it. While we can clearly have a conversation about how many of these stories are written by straight women as opposed to queer authors, there's definitely still a gap there that isn't being filled. I don't begrudge anyone for seizing the opportunity to have their identity reflected back at themselves where none normally exists. Now, let's compare how often each ship occurs. As expected, the canonical relationships and teased love triangles from the show all have stories written about them, but the vast majority of combinations are completely non-canonical. I say non-canonical, but as I pointed out before, they mostly have some kind of chemistry or subtext that's easy to pick up on and worth exploring, and we'll be getting around to more of that later. The biggest exception to me seems to be Durham and Miguno, two characters that have very little going on. These two are what I'm going to call sandbox characters. They're obviously close, and they have just enough listed personality traits to get people started. Miguno has poor eyesight and plays electric guitar with a vulture in a band called The Leftovers, whereas Durham is brash and physically competitive, often challenging Kola and Legoshi to wrestling matches. Their lack of screen time makes virtually any fan story feel plausible. I think people let their imaginations flesh them out from there, taking the characters in whatever direction they'd like, giving them rich personal lives that would take place entirely off-page in the story anyway. But let's go back to the culprits of the scene and reevaluate where we stand with them. Hang on, they're not on this chart, are they? There we go. As you can see, Louis/Legoshi completely eclipses all of the other pairings to an astonishing degree. But how can this be? Is that one aggressive scene all it took to put Louis over Haru? Well, no, but before I can explain what's going on here, we've got more context to work through.
I am a flaming Moltres!
That outfit! Where'd he get it?
I think that costume came right out of his closet.
Let's finally talk about queercoding. It really is a whole bag of worms on its own. Queercoding is a nearly century-long tradition in film and television, which had its start with the introduction of the Hays Code in 1930. The Hays Code was a series of self-censorship guidelines that determined what was and wasn't acceptable content for American movie-go audiences. There was to be no mocking of religion, no unmarried couples sharing a bed, no criminals portrayed in a positive light, and absolutely zero sexual perversion was to be shown on screen under any circumstances. Perversion, of course, including all homosexuality. Cool. Let's just create decades of art that doesn't reflect reality. What a great idea that's not damaging at all. While we're at it, let's just go ahead and straight wash all of history and shove thousands of historical and mythological figures into the closet. Achilles and Patroclus were just very, 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 very good friends. The Hays Code was in effect for so long that if you're my age, your parents were likely already born before it was finally replaced by the MPAA film rating system in 1968. Its enforcement was certainly weakening by the end, but that's 4 whole decades where entire categories of people were completely banned from the silver screen. But the gays weren't content to simply vanish from the world entirely, so instead, queer characters found their ways into stories non-explicitly. Creators found inventive ways to convey queerness through subtext and framing, working to tell the stories they wanted to tell, but in ways that were subtle and carried enough plausible deniability to get past the censors. It turns out there was a lot more leeway to be found in the portrayal of villains, and so the queer-coded villain was born. For decades, we've had movies where the bad guy adopts effeminate characteristics and gestures and speaking patterns and so on. There's a lot of good and bad here. On one hand, you may have noticed that a lot of gay people really like Disney villains, and it's easy to see why. They're flamboyant and charismatic and wildly fun to watch. But here's the most important part. Despite being frequently queer-coded, they're unabashedly proud of who they are. That can be a fantastic thing to see, maybe even to the point where you kind of forget they were supposed to be the bad guy. On the other hand, straight audiences are being shown the same stereotypes over and over again, affecting their perception of queer people in real life. Worse yet, marginalized groups are being portrayed exclusively as the villain of each story, which is one hell of a bad pattern to establish in the minds of the public. So this is the loaded gun that Beastars is playing with, and yes, I do think it knows that it's doing this. Understandably, everyone's going to come away from all this with different opinions on the whole thing. We'll start with my least favorite part of queer coding: superficial characteristics. There may be a language barrier here, but the character bios for Louie and Legoshi have a few interesting details. In particular, Paru Itagaki says that she pays extra attention to making sure that Louie is depicted as being visibly feminine. In contrast with this, Legoshi is large and powerful, but he's said to have a feminine way of speaking. Both characters are, in different ways, described to be out of step with the expectations of their gender. Now, this can be an important element of queer coding, but I also kinda hate it. Like, there are gay people who lack any and all traditionally feminine traits, and there are supposedly feminine men who are nonetheless completely straight. I can't help but think that this kind of topic is, in a way, the reinforcement of and policing of gender, so I'm not going to spend any more time on it. What I'm much more interested in is what characters actually do and think.
But did you ever get the feeling you're only going with girls because you're supposed to?
As we saw in The Scene and its preceding tail grab, Louis can't seem to keep his hands off of Legoshi. Even Bill takes notice, saying,
"You're kind of obsessed with Legoshi, aren't you?"
When we're introduced to the sheer power of Legoshi's sense of smell, everyone's scents are depicted as filing cabinets.
And what's inside the drawer that's the easiest to access? Is the scent of Louis.
Really, Legoshi? Not a family member? Not the canonical love interest? Okay. It shouldn't be surprising then that when confronted with a Shishigumi, putting his life in danger, Legoshi nonetheless can't stop wagging his tail because Louis is right there and he misses him so much. Legoshi has to lie and say that he's a BDSM host that was turned on by what he thought the lions were going to do to him, which, wow. Legoshi's interactions with other characters are also a lot. Juno is practically throwing herself at him, and sure, he'll teach her how to dance, but he's completely unreceptive to her romantic advances. His first kiss is with a man, albeit under contrived circumstances, but Paru Itagaki is still responsible for contriving those circumstances, and Legoshi does specifically think about the fact that that was his first kiss. He then battles that same man, shirtless, in the showers, alone, and that man thinks,
"I've never seen such a delicious-looking body."
Widening our scope to other characters, there's a pretty memorable scene where Juno tenderly holds Haru's face before suddenly fleeing the area like Haru is the serpent in the Garden of Eden, born to tempt her into doing something unholy.
You're cute.
Huh? What did you say?
I'm leaving before you twist me around your little finger like you did Legoshi and Louie.
Rizzo pretends to suck honey off of Pina's finger, who is later seen staring at his hand and thinking,
"So, I'm not entirely unlovable."
Oh, right. And Legoshi cross-dresses. Sure, there's a contrived scenario where he needs a disguise, but come on, at some point the wolf is like, "Oh no, for the sake of my investigation, I'm gonna have to wear a dress and kiss dudes." Gasp! These are mostly one-off observations, but the meatier material comes from taking a closer look at the long-running storylines and their underlying themes, which we'll be getting to for the rest of this video. Before we can get started, however, we have to discuss one form of queer coding that is unique to the Beastars universe. Remember that fantastic animated music video for Lone Digger by Caravan Palace? 300 million of you do, apparently. A bunch of different animals are at a strip club, but instincts take over and a bloodbath ensues. A lone digger is someone who dances alone at a club when no one else will. In this case, the titular lone digger is a gazelle stripper who just keeps on dancing as blood spatters across her form. Only a few months later we had Zootopia, which features a singing gazelle played by Shakira, who performed on stage while surrounded by those infamous tigers in bedazzled booty shorts.
5 humiliating mistakes in Disney's Zootopia. Number 5, why are these tigers so hot? Tigers aren't hot. Wait, are they?
So let me stir up those appetites, that chaotic mix of hunger and desire.
By the time we get to season 2 of Beastars, we've come full circle. Cosmo, a herbivore stripper, dances among a sea of carnivores, her only protection the bars of an iron cage. She revels in the influence she wields.
You don't know it, but you're the ones in the cage.
Caged by their instincts. But then the cage drops suddenly, and a tiger, minus booty shorts, pounces on her. I'm focusing on this scene not only because it's plenty memorable, but also because it functions as a microcosm for what Beastars is doing as a whole. In this story, sexuality and devouring are conflated to the point where the two are often extremely difficult to separate thematically. Yes, we're told that devourings are a thing that just happen all the time with no apparent sexual connection, but those attacks all occur off-screen to the point where they seemingly only exist as lip service to the concept. Similarly, we know this society can only exist if it's filled with completely regular, non-harrowing romantic relationships. But where are they? I guess we have scenes where Pina the Womanizer gets slapped? Does that count? Here we're getting into why you'll hear people refer to Beastars as a psychosexual thriller, because when it comes to the characters and the storylines that actually matter, Beastars always associates devouring with sex. And you know what? After several dozen examples, one might come away with the idea that Haru Itagaki is doing this on purpose, and that she might be making some kind of point. Her precise intent isn't always clear, and the series remains extremely flexible as a metaphor. For example, it's not lost on me that there's a feminist reading to be made on how this story represents gender. A huge percentage of on-screen herbivore characters are female, especially extras and side characters, while the carnivore characters are overwhelmingly male. This obviously isn't true for the setting at large, where it's safe to assume each group has an even gender split, but it's functionally true as far as the story is concerned. Be honest, when the male carnivores of the drama club met on the roof in season 2, did you even notice that one leopard girl was missing? No, you probably thought, yep, that's everyone. As a side note, this gender disparity does a little queering of its own, making male herbivores and female carnivores feel a little unusual by association. By the way, the anime actually changed the strip club scene dramatically. I think they were trying to tone it down because the original scene was somehow even more explicitly sexual. Cosmo didn't have a jealous coworker that wanted her gone in the manga. Instead, she was performing favors for a rich client in the bathroom after the show, when he suddenly turned on her. I've probably already made my point, but do you see all these tabs? All the green ones are just for this topic alone. I didn't take all these notes to make an elegantly concise argument, so let's run through some more examples. In Beast Complex, there's a chapter about a news writer. He's a camel who is tired of writing articles about devourings. He's baffled by the motivation behind them, but by the end of the chapter, he's in bed with a female wolf.
I want to devour you. I've never had the desire to devour an herbivore before. You're my first. This isn't just a craving for meat. Please believe me. Carnivores' appetites don't dictate our behavior.
Heart pounding away, he lets her eat his finger. Wow. Even when I say it completely literally, it still sounds like a euphemism for something, doesn't it? Which finger? Specifically the one he would have used to wear a wedding ring. To contrast this, we have the story of the tiger and the beaver. As children, they don't care that they're an herbivore and a carnivore, much like how boys and girls will often play together without distinction when they're young. Despite the fact that a real-life carnivore should be born with the desire to eat meat, the tiger in this story shows no such signs. Instead, the story ends with the melancholic note that the two are doomed to be separated as their bodies change and society treats them differently, signifying that their differences will be tied to puberty. Back in the main series, when Legoshi first pounces on Haru, in the anime we're given this extended segment where he struggles to tame his post-pubescent urges. The manga takes things a step further by pausing the action for an entire chapter in order to go back and establish Haru as a character. Her promiscuity is established, along with the reputation that comes with it. When we catch back up to her encounter with Legoshi, her inner monologue is enlightening.
I've always just been food to all the boys.
Do you fantasize about her flavor while you talk to her?
But you're an attractive girl. Why can't I stop salivating?
I could talk about the obvious stuff, like the love hotel scene, but it's the smaller details that really show the commitment to this theme. When Bill is confronted about the black market by an herbivore, he insists that it's just a red light district where they sell porn mags. And I shit you not, Chapter 24's opening page is a bathroom stall where somebody wrote, "If you're hungry, jerk off." This is why it's unsurprising that when Legoshi jealously declares his love for Haru, he's smearing blood along his mouth. Unless you're watching the anime, in which case it looks like Muppet Vom. This is literally the worst adaptational decision Studio Orange has ever made, pending however Season 3 turns out. I can forgive skipping over Bullet Bill, but for the love of God, please make the paint red. Okay, so, point established, right? Devouring tends to mean sex, at least when main characters are doing it. But let's go back to the infamous scene with Louis and Legoshi. This scene was already extremely sexually charged, but now we have the added context where Louis is basically feeding himself to the wolf, and all the thematic baggage that comes with that.
And what if I were to offer you one of my legs? You'd salivate and happily accept, am I right?
Pina pulls the exact same shit in Volume 8, cornering Legoshi in a dark room before shoving his hand in his mouth.
Say, for example, I'm alone with someone in a closed, dimly lit room. Of course, in the event that someone is a girl, I just want to kiss her. Do you want to eat me?
I don't eat meat or have a girlfriend. I need nothing.
I'm starving! Going to lunch! Gonna get me some veggies!
And then, as if to make the connection as clear as possible, the chapter with Cosmo the stripper literally starts on the next page. And then we get to poor Rizzo, who I'm pretty sure was just canonically in love with Tem when he devoured him. He goes on and on about their special bond and how he could be his true self around him. See what I'm talking about when I say this all gets pretty gay? It's Ponfar all over again, where Spock sought a release through another man through unorthodox means. So let me explain why Legoshi falling in love with Haru is gay. I know, this is going to trip up some of the more literal-minded people in the audience. First of all, let's take a look at a quote from series creator Paru Itagaki at the end of Volume 1.
This is an animal manga that is a human drama.
By specifying that the drama is human despite all the cartoon animals, she's basically screaming that her story is not to be taken literally. These are not the completely fictional problems of a completely fictional setting. These are real-life problems filtered through an allegorical lens. Let's think about world building for a moment. If your story was meant to be seen exclusively as allegory for issues of race, you would probably make the group that faces prejudice a minority population, wouldn't you? Once you get into the logistics of the black market and so on, there's actually a lot of reasons why it would make more sense for carnivores to make up closer to 10 to 20% of the world's population in Beastars. But no, carnivores and herbivores make up a 50-50 split, a ratio that only really resembles one real-life trait: gender. Homosexuality doesn't really come up in the Beastars universe. Paru has confirmed that Dom is gay, which supposedly is more obvious in Japan because he's a peacock, but that's largely outside of the text. In fact, if you don't count a bonus materials joke about Collet, I'm pretty sure the first mention of homosexuality isn't until chapter 127. Despite this, we have a very obvious population split where loving a beast who is a member of one group is completely acceptable and even expected, but loving a beast from the other group is subversive and taboo. There is a right answer and a wrong answer here. Speaking of the right answer, Juno is basically dropped directly into Legoshi's lap in episode 6. She's a grey wolf just like him, everyone seems to find her attractive, and she's really into him. Their image fits so cleanly into society's expectations of them that basically everyone around Legoshi pressures him to date her.
You can't deny she's attractive. Show some love to your own species.
Hey, I could smell that virgin stench on you from miles away, dude.
Do you know about that cute new Grey Wolf in Drama Club?
You mean Juno?
Hey,
Legoshi already knows her name.
Ooh, sounds promising.
Whenever they're together, they're repeatedly mistaken to already be a couple, because why wouldn't they be?
You're a carnivore couple. How does that make you feel?
We're not dating.
Episode 6 starts with what is very obviously a meet-cute scene. Juno is getting bullied, Legoshi lies to get rid of her aggressors, and then she immediately falls for him. What's interesting is what happens next, however. Legoshi is completely and utterly unreceptive to Juno's advances. It's not handled in the funny, oblivious, nerdy guy sort of way either.
I know just how strong wolves can be.
Oh, yeah. I see.
Why is he moving away?
He's actively shutting her down, deflecting and distracting from her moves, all the way up to the point where she contrives social situations where it would be embarrassing for him to reject her.
Our hero! Will you come up on stage?
What's he doing?
This isn't some love triangle where Legoshi loves another but is tempted by the irresistible Juno. No, he has no romantic interest in her at all because she's completely incompatible with his sexuality. That's not even subtext. It's just text. This makes it all the more tragic when everyone around them pressures him into pursuing her. Haru, on the other hand, Legoshi is completely obsessed with. He spends most of the series thinking about her or making decisions based on what he thinks is best for her. Yes, he often trips into the pitfall of idolizing the idea of her while not engaging with the actual person enough, but he's unmistakably into her. But she's from the wrong group, the incorrect half of the population, so his desire is seen as perverse and degenerate. Something to hide and be ashamed of.
I thought he grew up to be a fine, upstanding citizen, but he's clearly headed down a dark path. I mean, rabbit porn? Seriously? He's a total pervert. Why? I don't get it. Oh, maybe it's one of those fetishes?
This stigma forces him to suffer quietly, unable to share his feelings with any friends or family. He can't help but see himself as the monster he's been told that he is, and the solutions he comes up with on his own are unhealthy and malformed. One minute, he's resigned to being a stoic monk that will protect her from afar for the rest of his life, and the next he's rushing to a marriage proposal. The only person that Legoshi confides in is Gohin, who offers little more than a profoundly unhelpful don't. He basically gives Legoshi a rabbit porn mag to get him out of his system, which, wow, he produced that pretty fast, didn't he? How many different variations does he have on hand? Is there like a filing system, or... We're getting off track. Suffice to say, Legoshi's interest in Haru doesn't amount to simple preference. It's seen as undermining the natural order of things, to the point where Jack finding that magazine makes him worried that his oldest friend is headed down a dark path. Haru faces her own judgment for having so many sexual partners, but while it is a gross double standard, it's also clear that her perceived transgressions are nothing compared to Legoshi's. Haru is admittedly a bit of a gay singularity that sucks in everyone around her. These sentences I write. She has multiple homoerotic scenes with Juno before the wolf finally flees from her like she's the temptress that would destroy Eden. And that's on top of where Haru sits in the grand scheme of the show's subtext. There's honestly probably a whole hour of video to be made just about Haru and why she's such an interesting feminist character who exists as direct, preemptive pushback against anticipated audience criticisms. But that's far beyond the scope of this already bloated video. For now, just remember that while it's not an acceptable substitute for telling actual queer stories, there is an inherent queerness to Haru's relationship with Legoshi. And then you add in what we discussed about devouring and sexuality and just, wow.
You have struggled your entire life, and now you've reached your limit. You've suppressed your feelings ever since you were a kid. And you lived quietly in the darkness, haven't you? Is that sadness you're feeling? Or is it frustration? You longed for this taste for 17 years.
One of Haru's earliest narrations in the series is that
the winners in this world are those who live without hiding their true nature.
At first glance, this seems to be about how society forces those who are deemed deviants to hide their true selves from the world. Unfortunately for Legoshi, the most insidious mechanics for control come from within. In the opening arc of Beastars, the drama club is preparing a performance of Adler, a tribute to the god of death. Despite clearly being a carnivore, Adler is being performed by the lead actor Louis, who is a red deer, but we'll unpack his whole mess later. One injury later, Louis is forced to pass the role down to Bill, a Bengal tiger, who could in some ways be considered to be the manga's first villain, the tutorial boss, if you will. And like all of Beastars' villains, he represents something that Legoshi hates or fears about himself. Bill is everything that Legoshi is not. He's loud, boisterous, and proud to be a carnivore. Instead of constantly second-guessing himself and hiding who he is, he flaunts his strength and can often be seen pushing boundaries to see what he can get away with.
Afraid we'll get too riled up? I'm not gonna freak out. I just want to prove that felines are superior.
He's honest about what he wants, and doesn't seem to care about anyone else's feelings.
Then the girl started to cry and said, "You're only focused on pleasing yourself when we're having sex, and that makes me feel empty inside."
I refuse to live like Legoshi. I'm glad I was born a tiger.
Legoshi, on the other hand, is handily summarized by a single bullet point in his character bio. Struggles with his identity as a carnivore.
Because I've been learning the art of tension diffusion since I was a children. But back then it wasn't a job, wasn't even a hobby, it was a survival tactic. I didn't have to invent the tension, I was the tension.
He speaks softly, he slouches to obscure his true size, and he hides himself away whenever he can. Bill is an actor, but Legoshi is a stagehand by choice. He's ashamed of what he is, and goes through life apologizing for merely existing at all. This goes well beyond being considerate of other people's feelings, to the point where it's self-damaging behavior. He also noticeably polices the behavior of other carnivores, which I can't help but see as his own self-hatred leaking out. When Louis is being awful to Kai, Legoshi still defends Louis, even going so far as to break his own rules. He bares his fangs at Kai, another carnivore, despite a lifetime of conditioning himself to hide. This behavioral pattern of Legoshi's boils over when he's forced to perform alongside Bill in Adler. He finds out that Bill has a vial of rabbit blood, which he barely bothers to hide because his behavior is actually pretty normal for carnivores in this society. Legoshi, however, is incensed. Being raised in a heteronormative society has taught Legoshi to hate himself. His needs are deemed to be taboo, so he's hit by this deep, permeating shame every time he feels any desire at all. He's caught in a loop of despising what he is while also lacking the ability to change his own nature. Beastars as a whole is a flexible metaphor about the trauma caused by society's judgment, and how that trauma ends up reflecting back at society from within us. The world has been cruel to Legoshi, and as a result he acts in ways that are more cruel than we may be willing to accept from our protagonist. It's ugly, but it's honest. Legoshi strikes Bill on stage, and then he just keeps punching him.
Heteronormative ideology is pervasive and persistent. Perhaps the best illustration of this is the fact that heteronormativity is not just prevalent among those who adhere to it, but even among those violating heteronormative assumptions in one way or another. Gay men and lesbian women have been found to show weaker, implicit in-group favoritism than heterosexuals do, and to sometimes even agree with the negative opinions that society has about their group.
Bill has done basically nothing to justify Legoshi's violence in this scene, but as Legoshi continues his onslaught, we see more and more flashes of Haru. Bill, the person, isn't what's important in this scene. It could have been almost anyone. Bill's crime was being just a little too similar to Legoshi's self-image that he hates so much. An image that he's been conditioned to hate since he was a child. Bill is a mirror that the wolf can punch more than once.
70% of the people who raised me, who loved me, who I trusted, believed that homosexuality was a sin. 70%. And by the time I identified as being gay, it was too late. I was already homophobic. And you do not get to just flick a switch on that. No, what you do is you internalize that homophobia and you learn to hate yourself. Hate yourself to the core. I sat soaking in shame in the closet for 10 years because the closet can only stop you from being seen. It is not shame-proof. When you soak a child in shame, they cannot develop the neurological pathways that carry thought. Carry thoughts of self-worth. Self-hatred is only ever a seed planted from outside in. The only thing I knew how to do when I came out of the closet was to be invisible and to hate myself. It took me another 10 years to understand that I was allowed to take up space in the world, but by then I'd sealed it off into jokes like it was no big deal.
Legoshi has internalized the monster that society sees him as, hiding it away, untreated, until he now reveals it before a live audience. They gawk, their preconceptions only reinforced as two marginalized people maim each other for their amusement. They do not accept any responsibility for the root causes of this scene. Unhealthy coping mechanisms have only worsened the problem.
You want to punish me publicly? You think you're so much better than me? You're not. I know you've smelled rabbit blood before.
Legoshi is just a dumb kid without a plan, so this was never going to end well. He was never going to defeat Bill, nor the parts of himself that he saw within him. Bill soon gets the upper hand. Embracing the wolf, he sees right through all of his bullshit. He claws Legoshi's back, who will carry the tiger's stripes with him for the rest of his life, as permanent scars. This kicks off a motif in Beastars where every sympathetic villain's shared trauma manifests as scars on Legoshi's body. Nearly every foe he faces actually represents something about Legoshi that he fears or hates about himself, so defeating them has less to do with punching them harder and more to do with introspection and growth.
This is the proof of our bond. We both have stripes we'll wear with pride.
Chapter 20 is probably when Beastars first really starts to show how strange it's going to get. For the first time, we leave the main cast behind for a Beast Complex style side story. Legom is a chicken who sells her eggs for use in the sandwiches that the school serves. She's very, very into it, to the point where her self-worth and mental well-being are tied to the quality of her eggs. Legoshi loves egg sandwiches, and he zeroed in on the fact that he should buy them on Wednesdays because that's when they taste best. He doesn't know this, but Wednesdays are when they serve Legom's eggs, so he's unwittingly become her most loyal customer. They actually sit next to each other in class, and she takes great pleasure in it whenever she hears Legoshi praise her delicious egg in conversations with Jack. Things take a turn when one Wednesday Legoshi tears into a red bean bun instead. Man, now I want a red bean bun too.
You know, it's weird. They've been tasting different these days.
In Jack Saint's video, Beastars is a deviant furry masterpiece, he makes the point that Legom's obsession actually constitutes a fetish, albeit one that is socially acceptable to the point of being co-opted by capitalism. This contrasts sharply against most of the main cast, who suffer greatly because their deviancies are considered taboo. I don't want to contradict this reading exactly, but I think I have another idea to layer over it. When I read Legom's story, all that I could think about was gender performance. You may not be familiar with this term, or you may only be used to hearing it in discussions of trans people, but it's actually a much more universal experience than that. While sex is a description of an anatomical fact, gender doesn't really exist. Well, okay, it exists the same way that money exists, because we collectively believe in it and thus provide it with value. Because masculinity and femininity are largely made-up concepts, trying to conform to either of them can be a confusing and even damaging experience. As a man, I'm not supposed to ever let a woman carry anything, even though Stephanie is definitely stronger than me. And apparently, only women and gay people cross their legs or drink from straws. It's exhausting, and it's arbitrary, and yet many of us struggle to kick the habit of wanting to play along anyway. From a young age, our gender is conditioned into us, and we're led to believe that we are somehow lesser if we fail to conform to it. Nowadays, I'm not particularly committed to masculinity. The modern masculine ideal is often rife with damaging, emotionally stunting ideas that harm both the man and the people around him. To top it all off, anyone interrogating the rules of the game will quickly see the whole thing break down. The whole concept is filled with frustrating contradictions, and if you ask 3 people what it means to be a man, you'll be met with 3 completely different sets of rules. And then the moment you talk to someone from another country, you can basically just throw the whole thing out the window. It turns out that gender isn't only made up, but it's also extremely fragile. This is where we get back to Legom. She is in gender hell. As a chicken, the product of her performance of femininity is, well, a product. As an externalized object, it can be more directly appraised, and if she lets it, that appraisal of her femininity can rule her totally. Legom takes great pride in her eggs because they bring her praise, and through that, a deeper satisfaction. It doesn't seem like an exaggeration to say that Legoshi's weekly review is the most important moment of her week. But even when things are going exactly as she wants, Legom's performance is consuming her life. She exercises not for her own health, but for her eggs. And she's damaging her social relationships by choosing her eggs over her friends.
Staying up too late tends to bring down the quality of my eggs. What? You're taking taking this part-time job way too seriously. This is what I live for. After all, this is what we chickens do for our dignity and as a way to display our pride.
The quality of her eggs gives her life a sense of purpose. This is devastating to hear because her entire sense of self-worth requires external validation. Her emotional well-being hinges on the whims of one awkward wolf. The fragility of Legom's gender performance is underlined when she's hit by Legoshi's negative review. This destroys her. She faints in the middle of class, and we later see her crying on a balcony with a friend.
I question my ability as a hen.
But here's the thing. This hurt she felt? It was completely arbitrary. A change in the schedule moved her eggs to Friday. Her worst day happened for basically no reason. Just like in real life, the rules are all made up, and no one really wins. I can see all sorts of criticisms brewing in the comments right about now, so let's get ahead of them a bit. You may be surprised to find that I actually agree with you, whereas some of the other gaps are being left there intentionally. First of all, yeah, I don't speak Japanese. So while I'm already juggling the official English manga, online fan translations, the subtitled anime, the dubbed anime, all 4 versions of the story remain imperfect translations of the original message that has been filtered through third parties. Additionally, I'm not Japanese, which sounds redundant, but isn't. I'm aware that this story was written in a different cultural context than my own, but I'm choosing to ignore that. I will never be qualified to discuss Japanese culture directly, and adding caveats through this entire script would get very old very quickly, so here's your one mention of it. I don't think this is much of a problem, because at the core of all this, I'm discussing why queer Westerners find the story relatable and appealing, death of the author and all that, but it has certainly led to some headaches. For example, at the end of Volume 6, Legoshi's profile discusses his feminine speaking style, but only really says that he sounds insecure. So, I do some digging, and the fan translation of the same page says that he talks like a girl and starts getting into his self-identifying pronouns? But because this is such a web of things I don't understand, all I can do is wonder. Additionally, there are just so many versions of the text. It's like trying to interpret scripture. Obviously, the most authentic interpretation would be from reading the original Latin, or Japanese, but I can't. The anime has the issue where the subtitled and dubbed versions say different things, which you'll have noticed if you've ever made the mistake of turning on subtitles while watching an English dub. But then even with the manga, we've got both the official professional English localization of the manga and the unofficial fan translation. Take this scene from Beast Complex, for example. I said that the wolf ate the camel's ring finger, but that's only according to the English manga release. According to fans, she ate most of his hand, then put a ring on one of his remaining fingers. Thankfully, the subtext of this scene isn't really changed by this discrepancy, at least for my purposes, but you can see how this might turn into a huge headache very quickly. Hell, the official release and the fan translation straight up disagree on who Sabu, Hino, and Dope are. How does that even happen? I've also heard that Dom speaks in a way that Japanese audiences will immediately identify as gay. And there's maybe something going on culturally where the herbivore and carnivore stuff is actually an extremely on-the-nose real-life sexual slang where herbivore refers to people who can't, don't, or won't have sex? Or something? I don't even know how to even begin to research something like that. You might also hear some of my comparisons and think, hang on, that part's clearly about race, isn't it? And yeah, I did not somehow read this entire series and fail to notice that the premise is about race relations and an interracial couple. Haru and Legoshi run from the police in the subway because she realizes their argument is going to make people think he's threatening her because he's a wolf in public. Hell, there's even a scene where someone kicks down a door and yells, "Small lives matter," in response to police brutality. I'm just not talking about that stuff because it's not within the scope of this essay, nor my personal life experience. Frankly, I would only be clumsily regurgitating things that I've heard from creators of color online. Next up, is Beastars queerbaiting? I'm leaning no, but definitions seem messy. Yes, Beastars is a story where a lot of people pick up on a queer narrative despite the characters not literally being queer, but I've also never seen that get leveraged for advertising. Or so I thought, until Netflix Anime's YouTube channel uploaded tension between ya Beastars boys.
Disappointing.
That said, I don't think that Beastars does the kind of harm that Destiel, John Locke, and Dumbledore do. After all, this is a pretty long video, and I'm going to spend the rest of it discussing all the meaning I found, so if this is to be considered bait, it's pretty fucking robust. Okay, the carnivore problem. Yikes, you might say. Are you really going to spend 2 hours comparing queer people to literal predators? No. Well, I mean, I literally am, but that's not the point. But I can see how you landed there. A reoccurring misstep in media is the analogy that's compromised by having too many details that damage any intended message. A recent example would be the movie Don't Look Up, which is supposed to be about how the people in power are actively ignoring the threat of climate change. Yes, the movie is indeed about failing to respond to a crisis, but it's made messier by the fact that the meteor threatening to strike Earth isn't mankind's fault to begin with. Futurama's A Big Piece of Garbage pulled off the same analogy with a tighter message in only 22 minutes.
Some experts claimed the ball might return to Earth someday, but their concerns were dismissed as depressing.
I mean, what if the second garbage ball returns to Earth like the first one did?
Well, who cares? That won't be for hundreds of years. Exactly. It's none of our concern. That's the 20th century spirit.
Stories about marginalized groups frequently fall into similar pitfalls. X-Men has served as a metaphor for various marginalized groups for decades now, but when it tries too hard to have a message, its mission is often hamstrung by its own narrative. We've all had a good laugh at that Storm and Rogue scene from X-Men The Last Stand.
Is it true? They can cure us? No, Professor. They can't cure us. You want to know why? Because there's nothing to cure. Nothing's wrong with you. Or any of us, for that matter.
You can get what they're going for, right? It's pretty fucked up to talk about curing someone who is gay or trans or autistic instead of embracing the person that they are. The problem is that Storm's dialogue works exclusively as analogy. In universe, she's basically a god? Meanwhile, Rogue can't even hold the people she loves without threatening their lives. Getting much closer to Beastars, Zootopia clumsily handled the topic of policing minority communities, but in so doing presented carnivores as having a great capacity for violence, which muddies the point significantly. The film's most salient scene might actually be the oft-forgotten chase through Rodent Town, where Judy puts many people's lives in danger just to catch a single thief. I see this as a commentary on the idea that police might be an ineffective and disproportionate violent force to use against non-violent crime, but honestly, if the movie's making that point, I'm pretty sure it's making it by accident. So, yes, Beastars gets shinned by the same misstep. It frames the group that's being discriminated against as being potentially dangerous. The reason this is frequently a problem is that real-life bigotry is basically arbitrary, and largely exists in order to reinforce existing power structures. From the AIDS crisis to anti-Semitic propaganda, those seeking to discriminate generally have to invent fictions in order to justify their bigotry. Much like with the earlier example of Futurama versus Don't Look Up, a metaphor's meaning can be much more incisive when there aren't distracting contradictions getting in the way. That said, I'm going to defend Beastars carnivores anyway. As counterintuitive as it may seem, there's a long history of LGBTQ+ individuals finding that they relate to classic Hollywood monsters and interpreting their stories under a queer lens. A queer reading, or queering as it's sometimes called. Monsters like the vampire originally existed to demonize non-traditional sexuality, which is far from a rare trait among popular monsters. This was a harmful reinforcement of the othering of the non-straight. But in kind of a badass move, queer communities have been reclaiming these monsters, basically looking at what makes them strange and other and saying, yes, that, but unironically. Instead of being shunned and feared, these characters are suddenly celebrated, partly out of spite. If you're going to say this is us, then we're just going to take pride in it. And partly because their characterization can become relatable when viewed from the right angle. After all, isn't Frankenstein just the story of a lonely scientist pouring his soul into creating his perfect man? Rocky Horror Picture Show is so much more overtly gay with its flamboyant performances and costuming, but how much did it really change the core of the premise? And what about werewolves? A man who passes as a normal, everyday human by day, but at night, in private, he's secretly a monster? I think it's easier to see yourself in the monster when you're already used to society telling you that what you are is monstrous. Furthermore, when you already relate to the monster, then there's an emotional payoff to be had in reclaiming and rehabilitating it into something to be proud of. This is the emotional arc of Beastars. Legoshi sees himself as a monster because he's been raised to think that way. And so we all become invested in seeing him grow as a person and start to push back against those feelings. Anyway, those were just some of the nagging doubts I wanted to voice, so let's get back to the show. Wow, we're really calling this chapter that, huh? Do you know how hard it was to get 11,000 words in without saying that word a single time? I had a whole section about conflating devouring with sexuality where I didn't use it once. But I've got you now! If you've made it this far, then we're firmly in sunk cost territory at this point. I already have the plaque. You can't take it back now. If you didn't like how Season 2 ended, I'm gonna try to redeem it for you here, because I think it's basically perfect. So as I said, Legoshi was recruited to identify the person who devoured Tem. He immediately suspects the other male carnivores of the drama club, which gets him in trouble. When the culprit attacks him in the middle of the night, Legoshi is helpless to defend himself, so he's like, oh no, I guess I have to kiss him so I can identify him later. And he does. He kisses him. Our protagonist's first kiss was with another man. And fittingly, right after he kisses that man is when we get Jack's monologue about just wanting Legoshi to be normal.
All I ever really wanted was for you to get over your awkwardness and live a normal, happy life. What exactly happened to make you like this, huh?
After an incident that ends with them rushing Kibi to the nurse, Legoshi reveals that he has figured out Rizzo the bear was the one who devoured Tem. Rizzo?
Hang on a minute.
Oh no. I was thinking of the Muppets Christmas Carol this whole time. Could you imagine? What a haunting mental image.
Whoa, that's scary stuff. Hey, should we be worried about the kids in the audience?
I paid $80 for this joke. Laugh! Having absolutely no tact, Legoshi just accuses Riz right then and there to his face, and he's only saved when Pina butts in and ruins the moment. They end up having a fight where they wrestle, half naked, in the showers together. Dude, the people who don't pick up on this stuff at all are fascinating. Their fight is interrupted by the cleaning staff, and for a minute they're just two teenagers having an awkward moment, almost as if they're more embarrassed than anything. They agree on a specific time and place for their final showdown on New Year's Eve. As a side note, I just love the way that Beastars handles its power levels. Despite its genre blending and shipping popularity, it's still ultimately a shonen, or at least it was serialized in the weekly Shonen Champion magazine. So how do we establish the strength of the villain and the protagonist? Well, it mostly happens before we even know who the antagonist is. Tao is apparently strong enough that he tore Kibi's arm off completely by accident, but we see him struggling to lift a box. Bill pushes him aside to show off how easy it is, only to end up struggling himself. Suddenly, Riz stops by and picks it up effortlessly with one hand. Bill won't take this slight lying down, so he challenges everyone to a game of Jaw Wars. To everyone's surprise, Legoshi loses to Bill in the first round. Our hero is already very much the wolf, but then Riz stops taking his muscle suppressants, so he's only getting stronger by the end of the season. I don't have a larger point here, I just really like how they handled this scene. Legoshi is horribly outmatched, so it's time for him to train, but his methods leave a lot to be desired. He goes to Gohin for help, the same man whose advice for dealing with his attraction to Haru was basically, just don't. So we're not off to a great start. I don't see Panda Daddy as an overtly malevolent figure, and he clearly means well. It's just that his entire practice more or less takes for granted the idea that carnivores and herbivores can't truly coexist, let alone love each other. So it feels like he's contributing to the very stigmatization that makes his job feel so necessary to begin with. To strain the analogy, it's like he's a very sympathetic doctor that loves his patients, but nonetheless classifies homosexuality as a mental illness. He's trying, but his entire worldview comes from an inherently damaging place. So naturally, when Legoshi recruits himself, Gohin has him hunting down and capturing his own kind. Now, they're not killing these people or turning them over to the police or anything like that. Gohin is going to treat them, and in this universe they do pose a threat. But nonetheless, this kind of sucks, doesn't it? Furthermore, Legoshi takes to buying meat from the black market and locking himself in a room with it. His goal is to just sit there and stare at it for literal days in order to overcome his desires through sheer force of will, like some kind of horrifying DIY conversion therapy. What can I say except I hate this? If you're watching the series hoping for the queer-coded characters to accept themselves for who they are, a lot of Season 2 is absolutely brutal to sit through because absolutely no one is doing that. Legoshi is basically torturing himself in order to reach some form of enlightenment, as if he can escape being himself entirely. Meanwhile, his grades are slipping, he's getting very little sleep, and he's neglecting Haru entirely even though she's supposed to be the whole point of all of this. Sure, she was supportive at the end of last season when Legoshi pledged to better himself, but once the rubber hit the road, she realized that she's horribly lonely and just wants to be with him. The fact that he had the gall to propose to her after not putting in the time at all is astonishing. If Legoshi truly wants to be worthy of her, then what he actually has to do is participate in the hard day-to-day maintenance of their relationship. He has to be there. Instead, he's in full Haida mode, actively manufacturing excuses to stay away from her and hamstring any moment where they threaten to get too close. This habit's going to stick around for a while. There are some sweet moments, like when it's revealed that Legoshi carefully sourced the meat, which he then ceremonially buries and eulogizes. He knows each person's name and a little bit about what their lives were like. He's so close, overflowing with empathy for other beasts, but he's not allowing that empathy to extend to himself or by proxy to Haru. He is hurting them both by refusing to treat his own needs as deserving. Visually, a lot is happening here to reinforce the idea that what Legoshi is doing is wrong. Yes, he shaved his hair to disguise himself, but the result is that he spends this entire arc not looking like himself. He hates himself and is actively working to defy his own nature, and so he spends his training literally looking like he's a different person. It feels like watching someone waste away right before your eyes. Sure, we get this strange explanation that his strength is transferring to his limbs or something, but the memorable scene is of him getting obliterated by Bill in Jaw Wars, before then realizing that he's not even strong enough to bite into an apple. I don't think it's a coincidence that when he finally contrives an excuse to eat a bug, he has this spiritual experience and then his fur instantly grows back to its normal state. Deprivation was never going to cure him, because there wasn't anything to cure. It was self-destructive behavior, but the moment he indulged himself, he was suddenly Legoshi again. Oh, and if we're looking for more connections between Devouring and Sexuality, Legoshi has a wet dream on the very next page. And you want to know what this newly self-indulgent Legoshi realizes? That what he needs is Louis. On paper, Louis has nothing to do with the Riz and Legoshi plot. He's off running the Shishigumi and having his own arc. But Legoshi needs him to be involved, and frankly, the two have more chemistry than Legoshi has with Haru.
I'm a dirty wolf who just had a sexy dream about Haru, which means I'm still full of earthly desires. I'm powerless over my own primal urges.
After he eats the bug and has a naughty dream, Legoshi is pretty sure he's failed at his training and is going to die in his battle against Riz. Nonetheless, he wants a witness. And who does he want to be there for him in his final moments? His crush Haru? His oldest friend Jack? No, he wants Louis. Out of all the scents that Legoshi remembers, Louis is the easiest to access. What could that possibly mean? Legoshi's fur is back, so his disguise is a bust. He needs a new way in, and because he only thinks of the most logical solutions to his problems and definitely doesn't always default to something queer, he of course cross-dresses in order to meet with Louis again.
Hey bro, no homo, but I want you to watch me die. Okay, bye.
The showdown against Riz is absolutely brutal. He was always much stronger than Legoshi, and the wolf's training has done basically nothing to improve things. He unleashes his respect for life JoJo's stand, and it looks very cool and triumphant, and is abso-fucking-lutely ineffective. It's like those Scott Pilgrim swords, where it's all flashy and stuff because Legoshi believes in it, but it ultimately fails because he's learned the wrong lesson. There's a moment where Legoshi's limp form slaps horribly against a concrete pillar, and you probably think for just a moment, oh, he's actually dead. This is it. This is the end. Riz is getting ready to finish him off, but Legoshi offers the one thing he really wants: human connection. He slumps onto his side, leaving himself vulnerable, and offers to listen to Riz's story. Legoshi's maturing empathy, seemingly brought on by Haru, is how he survives and triumphs throughout the latter half of the series. In the opening chapter, he cared deeply about Tem's regrets, but seemed incapable of sensing Elsa's feelings. He treated Bill like a villain and refused to understand him, despite how much they had in common. But Legoshi is always so careful with Haru. He's gentle with her, and he finds ways to meet her at eye level. And he's careful to match her pace when they walk. When that snake security guard is constricting him, instead of panicking, he studies her scales and listens to her struggles. Sure, with Riz, he's stalling to regain some of his strength, but it's an important step. If he can emotionally connect with his opponents instead of demonizing them like Bill, he can begin to process why they scare him so much. why he scares himself so much. Louis finally shows up, and Legoshi creates enough of a diversion for them to escape. Barriers give way to unbridled sincerity, and the two finally truly connect. They both complete their arcs by recognizing that they were both wrong all season long. What comes next is controversial. Let me teach you a little Japanese. The word oshi means to push, but has become slang for a person who I support. If you are a big fan of someone, then that person is your oshi. If someone asks you dare oshi, it means who is your oshi or who is your favorite. So you'd obviously answer Blythe oshi. Our protagonist is named Leg oshi. What I'm saying is that he eats Louis' leg. On some level, I guess I can understand why this finale might be frustrating. You were told the goal was one thing, but at the end, Legoshi did the opposite. I'm reminded of a video game and a movie that both had the word last in the title, which also pissed a lot of people off because the characters said they were going to do one thing and then they did another. What I think is tripping people up is that a core element of a character arc is when the protagonist realizes that they're wrong. You're meant to recognize their worldview as a flaw that they need to grow to overcome, and then be satisfied when they finally change their mind. If, like me, you're viewing Beastars as being about a group of queer characters that need to shake off society's judgments and expectations and embrace who they truly are inside, then this finale is a triumph. Legoshi spends all season isolating himself, denying himself, and miserably withering away, but at the end, he connects with Louis, is true to himself, and goes fucking Super Saiyan as a direct result. Look at how this story is conveyed visually. Pay attention to how powerful he looks, and take in that smile. Everything is telling us that what just happened was a good thing. Legoshi's himbofication is complete. He's going to face consequences for what happened today, but I want to share a little glimpse of the future. It'll be another 7 volumes before Legoshi and Louis finally have a proper conversation about what they did here. But when they do, Legoshi will say that despite what followed,
I treasure my current self the most. I believe that's what it means to live.
In Season 1, he saved the girl. But in Season 2, he saved himself. Alright, let's finally talk about Louis. From the moment we meet him, he is a lot. This deer is basically Legoshi's opposite in every possible way. He's physically much smaller and much less powerful than the wolf, but while Legoshi is considerate and passive, Louis is smug and aggressive to the point of being physically abusive to his fellow classmates. There's very little to like here, but how did he end up like this? Louis' backstory is comically dark at first glance, because when it first hits us, we still aren't quite ready for how weird Beastars is going to get yet.
Where's number 4? Give him to me!
We found number 4, too! All right, time for morning practice!
The number from hell.
It turns out that Louis was raised as livestock to be slaughtered for the black market. We see him still being held in a pen at the age of 5, having never been taught how to speak. His product number is tattooed on the sole of his foot, the number 4, which in Japan often represents death. Luckily, the man who buys him is Ogma, a rich deer in search of an heir. Unluckily, Ogma is a horribly abusive father. When the child is not immediately obedient, he throws him into a room full of carnivores, only rescuing Louis when he tries to kill himself. At home, Ogma only met with Louis for dinner once a month, presumably leaving his staff with the task of actually raising him. Through Louis' narration, we know that he never knows what Ogma is thinking, and isn't even sure whether their eyes have ever met before. Once, when Louis failed to earn a perfect score on a test, Ogma bought him a 500,000 yen bicycle, and Louis couldn't even tell whether that meant he was angry or not. Despite not knowing his real parents, and being largely abandoned by his adopted father, Louis bears the weight of many expectations. His marriage has been prearranged, he is to be the heir to Horn's conglomerate, he's the head actor of the drama club, and he is the favorite candidate to be Cherryton Academy's next young Beastar. It's a lot, and he's so backed into a corner that if this was Paranoia Agent, you know little Slug would be coming for him. This doesn't excuse his behavior, mind you, it only explains it. Let's talk about toxic masculinity. Some of you may have bristled at that, but let's just chill out, alright? Sometimes this term is mistaken, often willfully, if we're being honest, to be an attempt to demonize all men. This is incorrect. Quick grammar lesson. If someone says they don't like blue cars, The word blue is the important word in that sentence. They're not declaring war on all cars. Likewise, we're here to talk about toxic traits that are commonly associated with masculinity, not masculinity as a whole. You see, masculinity is itself a social construct. It, in many ways, doesn't really exist in any concrete way. Instead, it's a series of rules that we've invented over the years, quite haphazardly, I might add, and the term toxic masculinity is an open plea to rewrite some of those rules that are doing a lot more harm than good. The goal is to be critical of how we socialize men, not just because of the harm we can do to others, but also because of the harm that we're doing to ourselves. Let's comb through the events of Season 1, from Louis' perspective, and compare them to Very Well Mind's description of toxic masculinity. First up, we have the stigmatization of mental health.
A 2015 study found that men who bought into traditional notions of masculinity held more of a negative attitude about seeking mental health services compared to those with more flexible gender attitudes. Toxic masculinity may also stress that it's inappropriate for men to talk about their feelings. Avoiding conversations about problems or emotions may increase feelings of isolation and loneliness.
The fawn I was 13 years ago keeps staring at me with pleading eyes. If my past is going to haunt me forever, I'll just keep pushing it away.
Louis had a deeply traumatic childhood that haunts him to this day, and yet he's doing nothing to treat his suffering. After all, boys don't cry. He's basically treating his trauma like it's something that you can just walk off. He refuses to discuss his problems with anyone, and lashes out as if threatened whenever someone gets close. Speaking of which...
Toughness. This is the notion that men should be physically strong, emotionally callous, and behaviorally aggressive.
When Bill finds out about Louis' past, Louis straight up pulls out a gun, presses it against Bill's head, and threatens to shoot him if anyone ever learns about his past. Yeah, they sure skipped that scene in the anime.
Power. This is the assumption that men must work toward obtaining power and status, social and financial, so they can gain the respect of others.
Louis is obviously on track to attain both social and financial power as the lead actor of the drama club, the prospective young Beastar, and the heir to Horn's conglomerate. Even when he rebels, it's so that he can be the leader of the Shishigumi.
Toxic masculinity glorifies unhealthy habits. It's the notion that self-care is for women, and men should treat their bodies like machines, by skimping on sleep, working out even when they're injured, and pushing themselves to their physical limits.
In Chapter 5, Louis falls off the stage and fractures his leg. Despite this serious injury, he continues to perform the lead role in the drama club's production of Adler. We're repeatedly reminded of the toll his injury is taking on him, and yet he refuses to stop until he collapses in front of everyone on stage.
Anti-femininity and homophobia. The 2015 National School Climate Survey found that 85% of LGBTQ+ students reported being verbally harassed at school over their gender expression or sexual orientation.
In the scene, Louis is offended by Legoshi's body language, and by assaulting him, polices how he expresses his own masculinity. The connection between Legoshi's stature and Louis' own insecurities is difficult to miss.
Helping behavior. In instances of sexual assault, men who identified the most with masculine behaviors were less likely to stop the assault.
Haru is kidnapped, sexually assaulted, and expected to die. Despite their relationship, Louis doesn't plan on doing anything. When Legoshi begs him to help rescue Haru, Louis strikes him instead.
The study found that men would intervene in any conflict if they thought their reputation as being traditionally masculine might be compromised.
It's only after Legoshi fights Louis in public and declares that he will win Haru from him that Louis finally ends up rolling up on the Shishigumi HQ with that gun he somehow has. Wow, our toxic little train wreck really checked every single box, didn't he? I blew past it a bit, but the scene where Louis assaults Legoshi is shockingly comprehensive. It opens with Louis kneeling on the floor, the Adler mask looming out of reach. It has obvious fangs because Adler is a carnivore, and whenever Louis dons the mask, he's pretending to be something that he's not. He's keeping his broken leg a secret, self-medicating with painkillers.
Seems like the more I exert myself, the more my body fails me.
Yeah, no shit, dude. Legoshi enters, seeing Louis' moment of vulnerability, which makes Louis lash out at him out of insecurity. He fixates on Legoshi's body language, and is clearly infuriated that a large man behaves so timidly. Louis basically calls this a perversion of Legoshi's true nature, shaming him and berating him for not conforming to his expectations of masculinity. But the moment Louis feels those fangs, he immediately recoils, and it's clear that he's compensating for his own fears. Let's talk about Louis' visual design for a moment. Beastars has a lot of fantastic characters to look at, but from a storytelling perspective, it's actually Louis' relatively restrained design that has the most to say. He's also, at least according to his creator, the hardest character to draw. As a deer, his most immediately prominent feature is his antlers, which many Servidae wield as a weapon to battle against other males for mates. As a signifier, the antlers warn you that Louis is going to buck heads with every other male character. At this point, they can't possibly serve a practical purpose in a modern society. Surely they get caught on stuff all the time. And the bonus materials even have to explain that deer clothes are made of stretchy fabric so that they can fit around their horns. Dude, just wear something with buttons. And yet, Louis takes great pride in his horns. There's something that he can project strength into in order to mask his insecurities about his own delicate body. He even counts them when he measures his height, especially if a woman like Juno threatens to be taller than him. Louis' antlers are an altar to the masculinity that he cherishes so much. Unfortunately for him, much like how masculinity is a fragile performance that threatens to be compromised at any moment, a red deer's antlers are not eternal. They actually shed and regrow them every year. That's actually how Louis meets Haru. His antlers fell off suddenly, so he hid in the garden club until replacements arrived. He was willing to lose 10 days as long as no one saw him like that. Such was the height of his insecurity. Insecurity over, I'll remind you, a basic fact of his body that he shares with all other male deer. A fact that pretty much everybody already knows. And yet he insists on wearing prosthetics. He's beyond the scope of competing with other men for status. He's chasing an unrealistic, impossible ideal of masculinity. The toll this is taking on him is more obvious than he thinks. He tries to pay Haru to rent the space, but she refuses. Instead, her condition is that he has to let her treat his wounds. Haru promises to keep his secret, but in seeing Louis like this, she becomes the one and only person that we know of with which he's let himself be vulnerable. Whether he wants to admit it or not, Louis needs someone like Haru in his life that lets him drop his guard and stop performing. Haru fills that role perfectly because she doesn't even know who he is, so she has no expectations.
Sheesh. It's too late to try and act all cool with me. You're a bloody Bambi when we first met.
Bambi? You have absolutely no filter, do you?
He tries to kiss her, but pulls away in shame when he realizes he's coming onto a girl without his antlers. Antlers that he thinks that he needs in order to be deserving.
You've been expected to be perfect at all times.
But Haru doesn't care about that at all. They get intimate, but Haru always notices how lonely he looks. He makes it a point to pay lip service to them maintaining an emotional distance. After all, he's set for an arranged marriage after he graduates. But one day, he runs into Legoshi on his way out, who challenges his self-image by just being there.
Gotta calm down. Why am I so upset? I can't imagine him sleeping with Haru. She must be toying with him. You ought to be more affectionate with members of your own species.
It becomes immediately apparent that Louis is emotionally dependent on Haru, and is quick to become jealous of anyone else spending time with her. Even when he's hurt, like when Bill claws his hand, he goes to Haru in place of the school nurse. What he has with Haru is the healthiest thing in his life. But the fact that Haru is expected to bear all of that isn't fair. What Louis needs is to let more people in. But that won't happen until he has some important encounters with 2 men in Season 2. Speaking of Louis' design, let's talk about his leg. Apparently a leg is about 10% bone and 90% trauma. His dark past has haunted him his entire life, manifesting as a brand on his foot. He then fractures his leg when he's taking on too much as lead actor. Louis' injury torments him as he forces himself through the pain, but the mantle of Adler is heavy, and he falters at last. When he comes to Legoshi at the end of Season 2, Louis presents his leg to be devoured, and in so doing, Legoshi finally frees him from his curse. But how did he reach that point? While Riz and Legoshi were both socially isolated by their shame and self-hatred, Louis was made lonely by his pride and his status. The others sought human connection above all else, but couldn't achieve it. Meanwhile, Louis ended the first season hoping to die. He had no intention of making friends. But friends found him. The Shishigumi had an interesting reaction to seeing that their boss was dead. Instead of devouring Louis on the spot, they elected to make him their new leader as a sort of rebranding of their organization. Louis found himself with yet another toxic role to perform, this one more literal than before. As their leader, he was expected to eat meat, which he did without complaint, even though his body obviously wasn't built for that. Every day he would retreat to his office to throw up. wasting away as he survived entirely off of energy drinks. Despite Louis' attempts to hide his weakness, his second-in-command, Ibuki, notices that he's struggling. The lion buys him a salad. Louis is insulted at first, seeing the gesture as a test. This is unsurprising because Louis sees any action taken by another male as an attack on his masculinity. But Ibuki persists and Louis relents. Just like with Haru, once Louis allows another person to care for him, they quickly become close. Over time, the Shishigumi take a liking to Louis, and he to them, though his bond with Ibuki is strongest of all. Just like Louis, he carries permanent marks from when he too was a victim of the black market. It is through his relationship with Ibuki and the Shishigumi that Louis finally comes to terms with his love for carnivores, which has unfortunate ramifications. On the day of Legoshi's fight with Riz, Louis realizes that he can't bear to stay away. He'll race to his friend's side even if it means leaving the Shishigumi forever. Ibuki agrees to drive him, hoping to change his mind. Suddenly we have context for this credits sequence that's been playing all season. It's the quiet, uncomfortable final drive of two men that have grown close but won't ever see each other again. Unable to accept Louis' departure, Ibuki drives the deer into a dark tunnel. He gives Louis a choice, to shoot him or be devoured by him. Louis can't do it, but Free saves him at the last moment. In his fear of losing one friend, Louis has lost another. Once Louis arrives at Legoshi's side, he's confronted by his own past mistakes.
I have to see this through to the end. To take responsibility for my own violent nature.
Why do you always refuse to own your own power? You still remember what I said?
He's been absent from his friends' lives, but his past actions have continued to affect them. Louis desperately tries to slip back into his indifferent persona.
If you're that eager to die, go ahead. Leave me. See if I care.
But the memory of Ibuki comes back to haunt him, and the cold words are drowned out by hot tears. He can't take losing another friend. Louis finally admits to himself how much Legoshi matters to him, and he offers him his leg. The same leg that bears the number 4, the death number, and the origins of Louis' complexes and trauma.
And what if I were to offer you one of my legs? You'd salivate and happily accept, am I right?
This is a complete inversion of Louis' behavior in the first episode. Back then, he was policing Legoshi, dominating him and homophobically mocking him for potentially harboring taboo desires. Here, Louis is instead laying his emotions bare, letting himself be seen as vulnerable in a way that he has always refused to do, and is literally offering himself to Legoshi. Overcome by the unprecedented sincerity, Legoshi can only accept. Two characters that have spent all season denying themselves complete their arcs. This scene is, at least subtextually, two men professing their love for each other and, consummating it. Consummate. What a coincidentally fitting word. Legoshi's long and rocky road to adulthood is filled with encounters with beasts that reflect elements of his personality that he struggles with, and every time he confronts his fears and grows as a person, he comes away with new scars to permanently signify the change. Today, it is Louis' turn. His leg is gone, and he will never be physically or emotionally the same again. When Riz is arrested, Louis tries to get back on his bullshit.
What should I, Louis, a red deer, say to him? Words that are high-handed, words that wound, words that impress others. I have all kinds of words as weapons in my arsenal. This is the beast who killed and devoured Tem. I've sacrificed a leg. Whatever I say will have a big impact.
But he can't do it. He can't summon the cruelty again. And he can't go on hurting people anymore to build himself up.
Riz, wait. What you did was unforgivable. But as a senior member of the drama club, I apologize for not realizing how lonely you were.
No one changes into a completely new person overnight, and Louis isn't suddenly a nice person. But there are positive signs. He visits Legoshi when he's in the hospital, and he cares deeply about what happens to the Shishigumi. Personally, I think the most important scene is the one that illustrates what he's learned about vulnerability. This was the guy who hid in the garden club for days because it was so important that he not be seen by anyone without his antlers. But the moment he gets back to school, unprompted, he shows Juno his prosthetic leg. His defenses go back up immediately afterward because everyone in this series is a train wreck, but it's an important step towards him becoming a better person. A not very fun thought you might be having right now is that if we're reading Legoshi as gay, then so is Riz. In fact, Riz is the single most obviously gay character in the show. When he talks about Tem, he says everything he possibly could to confirm it, only just falling short of confessing his romantic love for him. On top of that, we've got how he's framed alongside Legoshi. He fixated on Tem in a way that's nearly identical to Legoshi's fixation on Haru. Except, yeah, Tem's actually a dude. Okay. A queer-coded villain. Stop the presses. What a revelation. Ratigan antagonizes Basil like a scorned ex-boyfriend. The Joker is completely obsessed with Batman to an extent that becomes increasingly intimate depending on who is behind the helm of the narrative. Ursula was explicitly based on a drag queen. James is iconic. What I think sets Riz apart, however, is that unlike many queer-coded villains, his is actually a queer story in itself. He's not just adopting a costume or an affect. Although, all coding aside, I also like that Riz exists as a refusal to have a simple villain. No matter where his fight with Legoshi goes, it's hard to miss the fact that their society as a whole is partly responsible for what happened here. He's a tragic figure, and by the time you've learned everything about him, he becomes, if not a sympathetic character, then at least an empathetic one. I've been over how Bill represented what Legoshi hated and feared about himself, and Riz is that turned up to 11. Legoshi is forever haunted by the time that he almost hurt someone, but Riz lives with the guilt and coping mechanisms that come from having gone too far. Legoshi creeps through life, afraid to take up space, as if his very existence requires permission, but Riz somehow has it much, much worse. It turns out that bears in this universe are forced to take strength suppressants. Basically, Beastars has an entire category of people who have no place in their society. Rather than learning how to accept and live with these people, they're all forced to take pills that make them less like themselves, a punishment for being born at all. By the way, have I mentioned that this world does a eugenics? No? Oh, we'll get to you, Jack. The strength suppressants don't just stop at atrophying a bear's muscles. There are also additional side effects that negatively impact the lives of those who take them.
Do you have any idea how I suffer from the side effects of these strength-suppressing meds? The stress I go through? I feel like my head's going to split in two.
Riz's mind is altered, his mood worsened, and he's plagued by debilitating headaches. Unlike the problems that many beasts face in this story, Riz wasn't born this way. It was forced upon him by a world that saw him as a problem to be solved, with little care as to how that solution would affect his quality of life. Riz is a chilling subversion of the teddy bear image, and not even his taste for honey escapes this corruption. Honey is one of the only things that is effective at treating the bear's migraines. He's not enjoying a tasty treat, he's self-medicating just so he can get through his day like any other person.
There's something about you that just feels comfy.
Everyone sees me as a gentle giant, the big, quiet, friendly, honey-loving bear, but nobody knew the real me.
Instead of inspiring sympathy, Riz's struggle becomes an endearing part of his image, one that is massively misunderstood to the point of being commodified. On the cover of Volume 11, he fills the frame, holding out a bottle of honey. The honey shines, vibrant and golden, while he is left colorless. It's easy to imagine walking the streets of Beastars' city and seeing an advertisement like this. Honey sold by a smiling bear, displayed to a public that is either unknowing or uncaring of his suffering. Buy now for $12.99. The more I look at Riz, the more I think about Alan Turing. He was an English mathematician who was credited for cracking the Enigma code and potentially saving 14 million lives in World War II. His fatal flaw, at least according to his government, was that he was gay. Apparently there's no level of heroism that can overcome that sin, so he was chemically castrated as punishment for being born. The chemical cocktail they pumped him with reportedly took an awful toll on his temperament and mental health. When he was found dead shortly thereafter, his death was ruled as suicide. Alan Turing was a war hero whose story ended tragically for abso-fucking-lutely no reason, and his treatment is a blight on English history that will never scrub clean. But hey, he's remembered today in a movie that, well, seems almost as ashamed of his homosexuality as the English were. His struggle is commodified in turn. Riz isn't some war hero, but he was similarly doomed from the very start. Let's talk about unrequited love. Riz and Tem had a private relationship. Tem was putting himself in danger by spending time with him, but he did so anyway. He was the only herbivore that would give Riz a genuine smile, the only person that made Riz feel like he could be himself.
Do you get lonely? You know, because you're so big?
What kind of things do you think about?
Words far sweeter than the sweetest honey. I'm not sure why. It's like my body suddenly feels so light.
Oh, if you need someone to talk to, let me know.
For a gay person in the closet, it can be terrifying to ever be your genuine self with anyone. You're incentivized to keep your guard up at all times because it feels like one slip-up threatens to bring the full weight of society down upon you. This makes anyone you think you can trust incredibly important to you. Riz became obsessed with his friendship with Tem because he'd been raised to hide himself from the world. Tem was forming cracks in the emotional dam that Riz had built up throughout the entirety of his short life, and feelings were leaking out, feelings he had no idea what to do with, feelings he was unequipped to process because their very existence was taboo. The parallels to Louis and Haru's relationship should be sort of obvious at this point, all the way down to the part where a guy develops an intense emotional dependence on the one person who they think truly sees them. The difference was that Louis and Haru's relationship was one that society saw as acceptable. Riz eventually built up the courage to show all of himself to Tem. He stopped taking his pills, a medication that suppresses his true self, and met with him alone to make his confession. Tragically, we realized that Tem never truly had feelings for Riz, at least not like that. He isn't Haru. He had simply been nice to Riz in a way that no one else had ever been to him before, and the bear's emotional baggage did the rest. The image of Tem he had latched onto was an invention, a fiction. Their relationship was in many ways parasocial due to how much of it existed only in Riz's mind. After all, we've known from the very first chapter that Tem was in love with Els. Devastated, and utterly terrified of rejection, Riz accidentally hurts Tem, and then things spiral horribly from there. Unable to accept what had happened, what he had done, Riz rewrites the events of that night. After all, with the real Tem out of the way, there's no more pesky reality to contradict his delusion. That is, until Legoshi. Everything comes crashing down for Riz when he sees the power of Legoshi's genuine bond with Louis. When confronted with the real thing, he's forced to reckon with the fact that he'd only been imagining what a loving relationship might hypothetically feel like. That seems to crush him far more than Legoshi's Super Saiyan punch. In the end, no one actually takes down Riz. He just gives up. I think it's about time to take a closer look at Devouring. If you take it completely literally, it's a person eating another person, which is basically the most selfish and wasteful act you could imagine. As I said earlier, however, both the manga and the anime consistently conflate devouring with sexuality and love. There's a bit more nuance to that, though, isn't there? Let's take another look at that stripper scene and what I see as a mistake in the adaptation. In the anime, Cosmo is attacked by a random member of the crowd when a jealous peer removes her protective cage. This scene was a fabrication, likely intended to tone down the source material. In the manga, she's actually...
Cosmo, do we have to choose between those two desires? Right here? Right now?
He tries to devour her, and then Louis and the Shishigumi show up. This continues a trend where nearly every memorable devouring in the series takes place between a couple, or in an otherwise intimate context. It also directly mirrors the uncomfortable scene at the end of Season 1, between Haru and the leader of the Shishigumi. In both cases, a woman's own well-being is being threatened by a man's desires. Yes, devouring is being conflated with sex throughout the series, but at this point I think it's safe to say that it's the most selfish, damaging component. Back to Riz. He imagined Tem to be everything he needed him to be, reducing him until he was more of an object than a person. In his desperation to be understood himself, Riz failed to extend that same understanding to Tem, and so Tem was devoured, as one-sided relationships in this universe are always doomed to go. But things aren't black and white. Get out of here with that Sith and Jedi nonsense. What's most interesting here is that Legoshi still devours Louis, in a way. We see them both put themselves in danger to be together, but when they're at their most intimate, they grapple with the fact that love isn't a purely altruistic thing either. Before Legoshi devours Louis' leg, he has to admit, both to Louis and to himself, that he's doing it because he wants to.
If I eat you, it's because I want to eat you. Is that okay with you, Louis?
He's not just honoring Louis' honest vulnerability, and he's not just doing it to defeat Riz. He desires this. It's almost bizarrely nuanced, but it's also an important refutation of all the horrible self-denial training that Legoshi's been putting himself through. He can only consummate his bond with Louis and defeat Riz by being true to himself. Yes, relationships are about being there for the other person, but you can't exist purely for that purpose. Reciprocation is the key. Legoshi needs to accept his partner's sacrifices as well and embrace his own needs. This is the final step needed to push him from the depressing husk of Season 2 into the maturing adult we'll be seeing in the following chapters. Every character that leaves a scar on Legoshi teaches him something about himself. Bill gave him stripes for having the hubris to pretend that they were nothing alike. Now Riz has literally opened Legoshi's eyes to the harm his monk-like abstinence was doing to him. Aoba said it best back in Volume 7.
Those memories are so powerful I can live as a virgin for the rest of my life.
I get why I sometimes see darkness in you now. Your love has turned into a kind of religious devotion. Being in love is supposed to be fun.
Unfortunately, it's going to take a bit longer for this lesson to take hold. Before we push past Season 2, I figured now would be a decent time for a little intermission where I just talk about animal facts and some miscellaneous nonsense. I'm just having fun here.
I'm a mammal, carnivore, and part of the Canidae family.
I'm gonna level with you folks. When I first heard Legoshi say this, I thought we were establishing that he was from a family of wealthy politicians. I kept waiting for this to come up in the plot, but then Season 1 ended and it was just never mentioned again. It was the subtitled version that finally set me straight.
I'm a mammal, a carnivore, a canine.
Oh god, he meant Canidae, and I'm an idiot. Kennedy. Kennedy. Kennedy? Kennedy. Kennedy. Kennedy? Speaking of the canine family, our most lovable bunch is the Room 701 Canines, so named because Cherryton Academy dorm rooms are segregated by species. We've got Legoshi the Grey Wolf, Jack the Labrador Retriever, Collet the English Sheepdog, Voss the Fennec Fox, Durham the Coyote, and Miguno the Hyena? Hang on, hyenas aren't canines. What are they? They're hyenas. Spotted hyena, striped hyena, brown hyena, aardwolf.
Hang on, what was that last one?
Aardwolf?
No, before that.
Brown hyena.
That's not what...
I love these guys. They're like big fuzzy Muppets on stilts.
You know what? Never mind.
Sometimes people say they're more like cats, but even that's misleading. Hyenidae is its own family.
I seriously need to get glasses. So, Legoshi, you did say I would look great with glasses, right? Tell me more about that.
Okay, my headcanon is that Miguno's eyesight is just so bad he hasn't realized he's in the wrong dorm, and everyone else is just too nice to tell him. Hang on, he's in a band called The Leftovers. Oh god. I just figured out that Haida is a hyena because he's always watching Retsuko date other dudes, and he's hoping to pick up the scraps. Sorry, tangent. Generally speaking, Beastars presents all carnivores as these massive, impossibly powerful predators, whereas herbivores are small, slender, and apparently entirely made of tissue paper. There are edge cases, such as huge elephants or tiny little Voss, but they tend to be passed over for the sake of narrative simplicity. This is a contrivance, however, as real life is packed with absolutely massive herbivores that survive by grazing. The most obvious contradiction is right there in our two main characters, Louis and Legoshi. Grey wolves tend to cap out at around like 145 pounds as far as I could find, but an adult male red deer comes in at like 440. In a more accurate Beastars universe, Louis would absolutely wipe the floor with Legoshi. There's a reason wolves are supposed to hunt in packs. Speaking of packs, I also just want to say thank you for having a series that revolves around a wolf, where the phrase alpha wolf is, as far as I can tell, never mentioned a single time. Maybe she knew better, or maybe our bullshit just never reached Japan to begin with. For those who aren't caught up, alpha wolves do not exist. It's bad science that was refuted by its own author. Wolf packs in the wild are just families. They're a bunch of siblings following their parents. It's actually very sweet. Okay, one last thing. This isn't relevant to anything I'm talking about at all, but what did the anime do to Akata? Throughout the manga, careful attention is paid to make sure that he's always shaded to be darker than the other lions, a detail which eventually pays off in a conversation about colorism. In short, because he's darker, he grew up under the weight of the expectation that he must be stronger and tougher than other lions. But obviously he's just some dude. His complexion and his strength are unrelated traits. I guess we're just not going to have that conversation in the anime because it went and did a colorism on the colorism character by making him the same shade as everyone else. Well, Maybe they can fix that in the patch where they make the paint red. You can patch a show, right? Like with the Game of Thrones coffee cup. And who the hell is this guy? Seriously, look at the Shishigumi roster and then look at him and tell me who he's supposed to be. Alright, here come the spoilers. We're about to dig into Season 3, aka the entire second half of Beastars, volumes 12 through 22. This is the part that is often criticized for having pacing problems and plot cul-de-sacs, so on some level I can understand why Studio Orange is going to try to do it all in one season. What I'm afraid of, however, is what they might cut. The plot once again revolves around a big bad villain that must be stopped, but that isn't really what I cared about at this point in the story. Instead, my favorite chapters were the quieter moments between Legoshi and Gosha, or Liano, Jack, Seven, or Juno, or Pina's chapters with Riz and Bill. Even that time that Louis tried to have straight sex. I can't help but worry that at least some of those moments will be left on the cutting room floor, just like how Season 2 skipped over all of Legoshi's childhood flashbacks. Alright, quick summary. Legoshi drops out of school and finds out that he can't marry Haru because he ate Louis' leg. He finds a low-paying job at a ramen shop so that he can afford what is basically the lowest-end apartment in the entire city. His fellow tenants are a colorful, lovable bunch, but we're not going to talk about them. After stopping some drug dealers, Legoshi wakes up in the hospital to find Louis waiting for him.
Which of these three are you going to eat? Castella? Fruit jelly? Or me?
Now that I'm seeing him again, I'm wondering what it is that makes herbivores so beautiful. Louis, I've realized something very important. I've never acted out of some noble sense of justice. I just have an uncontrollable, overwhelming attraction to herbivores.
You stupid dog. You just realized that?
He finally did it. Legoshi pushed past all of his stupid justifications and just admitted who he really is. The current Beastar, Yahya, has a grudge against Legoshi's grandfather, so in order to prove a point, he recruits Legoshi to help him hunt down Melon. He does this by claiming that it's the only way to get Legoshi's criminal record expunged. Our protagonist's marginalized status is being weaponized by those in power to reduce his agency. Do what I say, or give up on happiness forever isn't much of a choice, is it? Their quarry, Melon, is half leopard and half gazelle. So once again we have a villain that reflects Legoshi's insecurities. In this case, it's the fact that his mother was half Komodo dragon and his potential children with Haru would be half rabbit. They actually capture Melon, but wanting to see the good in him, Legoshi lets him go. This only ends up earning him a bullet to the gut that puts him in a coma, sending him right back to the hospital. Legoshi then has an out-of-body experience in which he meets his dead mother, and he still blames himself for her suicide. When Legoshi wakes up, Yahya doesn't want him involved anymore, but Legoshi's determined to catch Melon himself to make up for his mistakes and secure his future with Haru. I have a problem with Melon, which is that while he is entertaining, he doesn't give me much to think about. He's a bit like the Joker, or that very queer-baited BBC Moriarty. He's just crazy, guys. He's nuts and he'll do anything. Whoa! He's even doing the whole, like, you want to know how I got these scars thing, except in this case, he's repeatedly baiting people to sympathize with him and his backstory so that he can stab them the moment they feel sorry for him. He does seem to be the product of child abuse, and he had a really creepy relationship with his mother, but I don't know. It doesn't seem to be analogous enough to Legoshi's trauma with his mother to be as meaningful. Riz was just such an elegant and textured villain that I can't help but feel let down by Melon, as entertaining as he can be. Melon feels all the more out of place because at this point, Beastars is very interested in discussing problems on a more systemic level. The story matured during the Riz arc and only continues in that direction, but then we get this Lord Frieza here, the final vestige of the tenuous connection between Beastars and the shonen genre. Feel free to defend Melon in the comments if you want. Maybe I just haven't had long enough to think about him because he's the newest part of the story and I'm totally missing the point or something. Anyway, Melon is the leader of the Shishigumi now, but they hate him and really want Louis back. Louis is torn between his feelings for the Shishigumi and his renewed responsibilities to Horn's conglomerate. He finds himself wielding a lot of political power when his adopted father dies suddenly, causing Louis to inherit his position as CEO. Haru has graduated and is now a student at the same college where Melon teaches, which is not great. Melon wants to eat her so badly that he stabs himself and is promptly fired. Okay. We do get this gem, though.
Predation is like a romantic love between male and female.
Okay, sure. Why did I bother even trying to argue that there's connections here if you're gonna just come out and say it? Haru Itagaki is in full-on gloves are off and subtleties for cowards mode, apparently. Haru's spooked, so she spends the night in Legoshi's apartment. She's gone when he wakes up, and he's so terrified that he ate her that his fur turns completely white instantly, but she's fine. Legoshi ambushes Melon at the Shishigumi HQ, only to end up getting caught on camera. To onlookers, it just looks like a carnivore was attacking an herbivore, so he's a wanted man now. Legoshi returns to Cherrington Academy to hide amongst his friends, the Room 701 canines, +1, until his fur turns back to normal and he won't be recognized anymore. This gives us a chance to say our farewells to Jack and Juno and the others. Also, Bill, Pina, and Alba all father a child together. No, I don't have time to get into that, but it's very sweet. Enjoy poly dads. Meanwhile, Melon is busy starting a gang war in the black market. All of the different Goomies are going to have a tournament arc together, which Legoshi joins solo like a madman. Louis and Legoshi revisit the building where Louis was imprisoned as a child, only to find that 2 of his cellmates are somehow still living there. The rabbit, Q, basically has a JoJo's stand, so Legoshi begs her to train him. She eventually agrees, but then just starves Legoshi and sells his information to Melon. Haru and Legoshi finally kiss. Melon suddenly transforms from the small frame of a gazelle to a much larger leopard. Legoshi, kind of wins the tournament through empathy? Outside, tensions between carnivores and herbivores are currently reaching a peak. Louis calls attention to the gang tournament during a press conference, leading to the complete and total destruction of the black market. Melon tries to kill himself, and then Yahya, but ultimately just ends up imprisoned. Yes, I know, I skipped over 7, quick, all marine animals, the 500-cornered rats, the horny poop coffee. The horny poop coffee. Oh, the things that I write to just make myself say in the future. All right. The quiz show, the river Styx, Louis pouring his blood all over himself, Melon's trypophobia, Agata's final stand, and more cross-dressing. It's just so much. And I did have a lot of fun reading it all, but it's just not going to come up. What I'm much more interested in, once again, is the details along the way. Immediately after his fight with Riz, the police pump Legoshi's stomach, but agree not to directly punish him, based on Louis and Pina's testimony. I say directly because they still give him a record as a registered meat offender. The language here is not really vague in its analogy. Despite the fact that what they did was done consensually, Legoshi is basically a registered sex offender because of his deviancy. Even the consequences are similar. Legoshi's status as a meat offender will henceforth be declared at every applicable step, so he will not be able to go to college and will now permanently struggle to find a job or a place to live. Welcome to the second half of Beastars. Legoshi is thrust into the adult world and the social commentary immediately gets turned up to 11. Hang on a minute, you might say. We don't register gay people as sex offenders. While it is true that the US Supreme Court ruled the criminalization of sodomy and oral sex to be unconstitutional in 2003, Idaho has continued to require those previously convicted of these consensual acts to be registered as sex offenders. And South Carolina. And Mississippi. Great country we've got here. Randall Menges, whose crime today wouldn't even be an arrestable offense, was even refused access to a homeless shelter because of his status. A homeless shelter that he likely needed because of his status. Make no mistake, this is, through loopholes, the continued criminalization of homosexuality. If you thought this fight was over, then you haven't really been paying attention. Cut off from his support network, and without much hope for future prospects, we watch as Legoshi lies strung out in a barren apartment, suffering through withdrawal symptoms alone. Despite all that he's currently going through, the thing that bothers him the most is that his registered status has made it illegal for him to marry Haru. Louis' story at this point is also depressing for its own reasons, but much more affluent. Having left the Shishigumi, he is now destined to reclaim his inheritance of Horn's conglomerate, as per his adopted father's wishes. With this comes power, but also restrictive expectations, including his arranged marriage with Azuki, a female red deer. This leads to the most aggressively heteronormative scene ever committed to manga. Louis is about to have sex with his fiancée, and he's really psyching himself up about all the straight sex he's totally about to have, but all he can think about is that she's not a carnivore. His mind is occupied by Juno and Legoshi and Ibuki. To somehow make it all worse, the TV is set to Fox News, and some psychologist pundit is banging the desk and yelling about the innate savagery of carnivores. Forces from within Louis and without are trying their damnedest to quash his queerness, but it just doesn't work that way. Overwhelmed, he throws up instead, everywhere. And he calls the Shishigumi to hang out with him and comfort him.
I need to hang out with you guys tonight. Do you understand? I've completely lost my mind. Instead of embracing a female in a hotel room, I'd rather be surrounded by male carnivores.
That could mean anything. In a few scenes from the manga that Season 2 skipped over, we learned that Legoshi comes from a mixed family. While both of his parents were wolves, his grandfather, Gosha, is a Komodo dragon. As a venomous reptile, Gosha faces additional discrimination on top of the usual challenges of being a carnivore. Their venom can be dangerous, yes, but he goes to great lengths to ensure the safety of those around him. His efforts are not rewarded, however, as misinformation exaggerating his danger follows him everywhere he goes. Since Legoshi's mother was absent, Gosha ended up raising him as his own son. Growing up, Legoshi had to get used to eating in the back of restaurants because society pressured Gosha to stay out of sight, as if even being in the same room as him was dangerous. We get a hint there as to why Legoshi's always been so withdrawn, since he faced discrimination through his grandfather long before the brunt of it would be directed at himself.
It always made me uncomfortable that you sat at dark tables when you'd done nothing wrong.
On the cusp of adulthood, Legoshi reunites with his grandfather for the first time since he was a kid. It's right here, in the transition from volume 12 to 13, where the description "struggles with his identity as a carnivore" drops from Legoshi's character bio, where it had been since the beginning of the series. He refuses to hide, and insists that they sit by the window. They catch up for a while, and it's cute, but Gosha worries that having a hard childhood may be why Legoshi dropped out of school. And then, the inevitable happens.
You're a poisonous beast. You got some nerve sitting at a good table. This restaurant is full, old man. You better leave before you turn the place into a gas chamber.
Gosha is ready to retreat after a lifetime of peacekeeping habits, but Legoshi is young, angry, and ready to fight.
What did you say? I don't understand. You think giant lizard poison is transmitted through the air? That's not possible.
So, to recap, Gosha is a man from an older generation whose bodily fluids are poisonous, and as a result of fear-mongering and misinformation, faces unfair discrimination from society. I think you know where I'm going with this already, but let's go ahead and just do the math anyway. So this chapter seemingly takes place in 2017. Gosha is 54 years old, which would place his birth date in 1963. Add 20 years to reach sexual maturity, and you end up in 1983, just in time for the AIDS crisis, which is commonly documented to have lasted from 1981 to 1995. This is one of those details that feels so weirdly specific that I struggle to imagine it not being on purpose. Unfortunately, as was the case with many during the AIDS crisis, Gosha's wife, Toki, died not long after Legoshi's mother was born. Gosha always took precautions whenever they were intimate, but Toki was frustrated by these steps, viewing them as a barrier between her and her lover that always ruined the moment. One day, she recklessly bypassed his safeguards, which led to her infection and death. Despite raising multiple generations of his own family, Gosha's blood relation with Legoshi is not recognized by the government. While these taboo relationships are slowly becoming more accepted in Legoshi's time, Gosha harkens back to a much more difficult era for people like him. In case the queer coding of Gosha wasn't already strong enough, we're also meeting Yahya around this point in the manga. Yahya is the current Beastar, which is basically Batman. He's a self-described warrior for social justice, but a horribly flawed one who is clearly carrying around his own bigotries. Many years ago, Yahya and Gosha were close enough to raise some eyebrows. The government was pitting them against each other to compete for the title of Beastar, but sharing one motorcycle, they throw away their commendations. They're physically linked with each other in this moment while also declaring that nothing will come between them. Do I even need to point out subtext anymore? But something does come between them. Gosha meets and falls in love with Toki, who will one day be Legoshi's grandmother. and drops out of the running for the Beastar title.
Beasts often feel the greatest attraction to those who are the most different from them, but that intensity only courts disaster.
This quote from Yahya might be referring to Gosha and Toki, but it's vague enough that it could also mean Gosha and Yahya. After all, it's on the page immediately preceding the depiction of their young bond. Fast forward to the modern day, and the Beastar Yahya behaves like a scorned ex-lover. He exclusively sleeps with other horses now out of spite, blaming mixed relations for taking the most important man in his life from him. Yahya repeatedly refers to the extremely wide field of view that horses have, and the dark, lonely blind spot that Gosha used to fill. Yahya ends up taking out this grudge on Legoshi.
If you grovel on the floor, apologize for being born a carnivore, you won't become fertilizer, like these other evil beasts.
I'm sorry for being a carnivore. I will always bear my burden of sin.
In a weirdly badass but depressing move, Legoshi pulls out his own fangs, almost as if to say, "Is this what you want? For me to be unmade? Fine."
There. Now I've earned the right to punch you.
Yahya is the first villain whose scars on Legoshi are self-inflicted, but this is not progress. Yahya's prejudice against Legoshi has caused a regression. Okay, I'm sorry, but I need to explain how fucking weird Jack is as a character. Don't worry, this is going somewhere. Okay, so back in college when I was taking paleontology, I did a research paper on the domestication of wolves. Basically, we kind of did it by accident at first, and then later on purpose. The idea is that the wolves that were more sociable and less afraid of humans would be more likely to follow their camps and steal their food scraps and leftover game. And then since they were in proximity with each other, those wolves were more likely to breed and produce even more sociable offspring. Once they became more approachable, they began to integrate into human society, and the more useful among them were obviously the ones we ended up breeding even more. Here's a weird bit of biology. Generally speaking, baby mammals are very sociable. They can learn to form attachments with basically anyone, and anything can become their normal. But once they age, they get set in their ways and are much less likely to form new habits and connections. Old dog, new tricks, and all that. Or wolf in this case. So it turns out when you breed animals to become more sociable in the long term, you're kind of breeding them to be babies forever? Kind of? This is called neoteny, or juvenilization. Your dog is kind of a giant baby. This may not actually come as a surprise, but your dog is actually also kind of a baby in more physical ways. Like wolf pups bark and have floppy ears, whereas adult wolves' ears stand up, and they actually stop barking and only howl.
Gary, quit it. You're gonna start a howl.
I didn't start it.
He's trying his best. I have spent way too much time watching wolves just completely blow it at howling. They are nowhere near as majestic as we've been led to believe. Anyway, how the fuck does Jack exist? If you've been following along, you've probably hit the point where you've realized that wolves don't really exist in Beastars, only wolf people. And there are no humans, so how did we end up with a Labrador? This gets weirdly dark, actually. Here comes more insane world building. Season 2 should have opened with a flashback. Chapter 49 is the story of how Jack and Legoshi first met when they were 7 years old, and oh my god, you cannot just hit me with baby Legoshi like this. He's so fucking precious, holy shit. So the herbivores and carnivores actually went to war with each other for a year and a half, and in the aftermath, dogs were created as a sort of superior breed over wolves. Much like real dogs, they were engineered to better integrate into society by being more agreeable and less threatening. This was only 90 years ago. So, Jack is the result of genetic experimentation. When they met, Jack and Legoshi got in a fight because they both envied what the other had. Our tragic boy Legoshi had already internalized a lot of self-hatred at this point and wished he could be less of a wolf, like Jack. Meanwhile, Jack was constantly being bullied for being a fake wolf, so he couldn't take it when he heard Legoshi rejecting what he had. They get over it pretty quickly, and their brief rivalry is quickly replaced by a friendship born of mutual curiosity. The two have been friends for a very long time, sometimes even proving to know the other better than they know themselves. But there's also a permanent rift between them because they're fundamentally wired differently from each other in a way that each of them can never fully understand. A full decade later, Legoshi continues to struggle with both his nature and his place in society. He feels like the world wasn't built for him to participate in it. Meanwhile, Jack seems entirely comfortable with his lot in life. He doesn't question the system, he only questions those that go against it. This makes a certain choice in the second episode of the anime very interesting.
Naturally, eating meat of any kind at school would be considered a serious crime. That's why all meals are well balanced with plenty of nutrition, protein, and taste in order to satisfy everyone. Satisfy everyone.
Monsters, every one of you!
Satisfy everyone. Satisfy everyone. Satisfy everyone.
Just eat me already!
I can't. Satisfy everyone. Satisfy everyone.
Salivating!
Satisfy everyone. Satisfy everyone.
This quote becomes much funnier once you know about Riz's self-medicating honey, the black market, or, the entire plot of the show. But Jack says it with such confidence, like he really believes it, and perhaps he himself truly is satisfied. Jack is unable to imagine that this system fails people, that carnivores are falling through the cracks. He is the template for a model citizen.
System justification theory argues that individuals are motivated to defend existing systems, such as political and social structures, because they help coordinate social relationships and create a sense of shared reality, reducing feelings of uncertainty and threat. Importantly, individuals may defend such systems even if they disadvantage them, because it makes them feel better about the status quo. Indeed, LGBTQ+ individuals who minimized versus acknowledged the extent to which their group is the target of discrimination perceived the system as fairer and consequently reported better well-being.
Jack explaining the rules here makes a lot of sense for the show, because he's fully internalized what's expected of him at this point in his life and absolutely never steps out of line. Jack is the carnivore ideal, with old natural instincts and urges repressed. Once you understand how limited his experience and worldview is, you realize how naive this narration was. He's succeeding under the system, so he just wants everyone else to do so too. When they don't, he doesn't understand what to do.
Thought he grew up to be a fine, upstanding citizen, but he's clearly headed down a dark path. I mean, rabbit porn? Seriously? He's a total pervert. Why? I don't get it. Oh, maybe it's one of those fetishes?
In case it isn't already clear, I see the domestication of dogs in Beastars as analogous to cis-heteronormativity. This is the default assumption that everyone in society is heterosexual and cisgender by default. At first glance, this might seem like an accurate statistical guess to make, and thus a good model for approaching life. But blind spots quickly become apparent. When Legoshi exhibits deviant behavior, Jack can't comprehend it. He has no personal experience to use as a reference point, because he's had all of these feelings artificially wrung out of him. He lives in a world that treats him poorly for who he is, but he has minimized his perception of that harm as a defense mechanism. Society's heteronormativity has been programmed into him.
All I ever really wanted was for you to get over your awkwardness and live a normal, happy life. What exactly happened to make you like this, huh?
In that moment, Jack seemed so bright and so far away. We'd become completely different beasts.
Jack loves Legoshi, but he seems incapable of actually being a positive force in his life, now that he really needs it. Instead of understanding, what Jack brings to the table is guilt and shame. Worst of all, Legoshi has so much internalized self-hatred at this point that he tends to agree with him.
Have you tried not being a mutant?
Jack's second bit of narration explains what a Beastar is, but we don't really get the full picture until much later when we meet Yahya. Like I said, the Beastar is basically Batman, enacting private vigilante justice, except they're also state-sponsored, so they're basically a super cop that gets to skip past all the red tape and go after whoever they want. Movies often frame this as cool and noble, but in reality it's actually pretty horrifying for the police to enact extrajudicial punishment. As the resident system endorser, it's not surprising that Jack would speak positively about the Beastar. Dogs fit very nicely into the police. Darth, the police chief, is a dog. It's two dogs that arrest the 500 rats, who are then assaulted in police custody. When the police are mobilizing to track down Melon, there's an entire team of dogs sitting together. Even during Riz's arrest, there's a dog among the squad who is always given the most prominent position in the frame. Childhood Jack wished that he had been born a wolf, but young adult Jack walks the tragic line of befriending a wolf while tacitly endorsing the systems that make that wolf's life hell. One could easily imagine an outcome for this story where Legoshi is the criminal behind bars, with Jack being the officer that put him there. Crimes?
Crimes.
You might be thinking right now that this whole ACAB section came out of nowhere, but it's an unfortunate reality that queer communities have a history of being at odds with the police. It would be hard not to be when in many countries their very existence has been criminalized. For an extended look at this topic, check out James Somerton's video, The Necessity of Gay Crime. Hell, today, in the United States, Florida and Texas are actively working to recriminalize queerness. This is not behind us. I think it's a powerful detail that when two queer-coded characters confront each other, Legoshi does not call the police to resolve the conflict with Riz. He refuses the chance to throw him to the dogs. In fact, the police are consistently either incompetent or actively an obstacle for Legoshi. He's either treated with suspicion or actively hunted by them throughout the series. Come to think of it, no matter what real-life group you interpret the carnivores to represent, the police aren't really seen as an ally to any of those communities, are they? Interestingly, Gosha and Yahya both thumb their noses at the idea of competing to become the Beastar super cop, with Yahya only hard committing after Gosha leaves him. Not only is Yahya overtly bigoted despite his claim that he fights for social justice, but he also uses excessive force and has admittedly killed several people. Cherrington Academy's young Beastar candidate was supposed to be whoever caught Riz, but Legoshi is a political hot potato after having, partaken in his dear boyfriend, so they try to nominate Louis instead as a cover-up. He also refuses the title of Beastar. This is a series that is literally named after the equivalent of Batman, where both main characters completely disregard that station and don't even end up begrudgingly donning the mantle by the end. The series Beastars basically says, fuck the Beastar, though. I know the little ghost goober guy writes Beastars all symbolically at the end, but only Louis sees that. I think that it's at most an acknowledgement that the pair might be embodying the ideal that the real Beastar never actually lived up to. I've got this picture of an onion here. I just really like onions, and so when I saw this cool drawing of what an onion looks like in detail in bloom, I just thought that was cool and I wanted it. I have not hung it anywhere. It's just been sitting on a shelf, but like now it's a useful prop. It's gonna come up. But hey, if Jack's your favorite character and you're sad now, don't worry. It turns out that most characters in Beastars have actual arcs. What a novelty. When White Fur Legoshi hides out at the school after a year of absence, the Jack he finds on his return seems changed. Jack has earned his way into an elite group of top students. There are only 5 of them, and to his horror, every single one of them is a dog. This is a bit of a disturbing pattern to find in such an otherwise diverse place. The people who succeed in this place are those that have been most thoroughly programmed by their society's expectations. They're so distressingly similar that Jack worries he too must be exactly like them. Furthermore, what they're learning in these secret classes is fundamentally reshaping their understanding of the world around them. But it was their devotion to that world in the first place that got them in this room, and yet they will just as easily replace that world with another if the screen tells them to. This is because it isn't the facts themselves that actually matter, it's faith in the system that matters. We're right back at system justification theory. Speaking as a top student myself, being at the top of your grade isn't a reward for innovation or emotional intelligence. It's a reward for competent compliance. Oh, sure, I learned the scientific method and a version of history and how to write an essay. But above all else, I learned how to be a good student, which isn't even necessarily the same thing as having a talent for learning. I'm not saying that it's in any way bad to do well in school. It's just nowhere near the sum total of your human value the way it pretends to be for over a decade of your life. What did Jack get for his loyalty to the status quo? He judged his friend, missed any chance to be there for him, and ultimately ended up alone. In this way, heteronormativity harms everyone, not just queer folks. When a healthy connection is lost, 2 people suffer. And when they do so, toxic expectations leave them emotionally unprepared to even grieve what they've lost.
I know I'm suffering, so why can't I bring myself to hate any of it? Why can't I bring myself to cry and run away from it? Because dogs are made not to feel negative emotion.
Jack rebels, rejecting the liberal apathy of the dogs. He's been cutting onions in an attempt to cry, desperate to reconnect with the emotions he's been rewarded for suppressing. He wants to finally get mad at the world that's hurting his friend, to get even closer to Legoshi, to understand him, and to finally hear his howl.
At this rate, dogs are going to turn animal society into a dog dictatorship. They're the kind of animals who, when told it's rational, can commit mass murder without guilt. Dogs are scary. I am too.
At his lowest moment, Jack swallows an onion. Onions are very poisonous to dogs, basically destroying their red blood cells. Legoshi painfully forces his fingers down Jack's throat to make him throw up, saving his friend. After this ordeal is past them, Legoshi acknowledges how much Jack has opened up to him today. He honors this by finally howling for him, something that he's seemingly never done for anyone before. So what is this real history of the Beastars universe anyway? Our primary information sources are the flashback from Volume 6, Melon's lecture in Volume 17, and Jack in Volume 18. First of all, carnivores and herbivores existed independently of each other, but once they did encounter each other, carnivores had no desire to devour herbivores. So, bam! Just like that, a fundamental assumption about how this setting works is right out the window. The bio-truths and nature versus nurture debate is just exploding all over the place. What's even more nuts is hearing that the concept of meat was invented after the war, which coincides with when dogs were first created. Okay, so I know this isn't a perfect comparison, but the source of Legoshi's sin being invented alongside one of the strongest cultural drives for heteronormativity is just so much. What I love in particular about this section is that it highlights the fact that the world of Beastars and its many problems are both artificial in nature and way younger than you would intuitively expect. This is where it feels like Paru Itagaki is basically screaming at us to understand that Legoshi's problems aren't derived from biological determinants, but from societal ones. You want to know what else was invented about 100 years ago in real life? Heterosexuality. This video is going places. Gender and sexuality have always existed on a spectrum, and early attempts to draw hard categorical lines were interesting. In 1901, Dortland's Medical Dictionary, published in Philadelphia, defined heterosexuality as
abnormal or perverted appetite toward the opposite sex.
Based. Not only is the concept way younger than you would have ever expected, but it took decades to even land on the definition that we're used to today. Beastars echoes reality, in which queer people are suffering, but progress is slowly being made. But in both worlds, if we take a look at history, we can find times where there wasn't a problem to begin with. Today's deviants are yesteryear's unremarkables. Depending on when and where you look, homosexuality and third genders were simply another fact of life. It's almost as if someone came along and decided that there was a problem, and it wasn't queer people.
The idea of heterosexuality as the master sex from which all others deviated was, like the idea of the master race, deeply authoritarian. The Doctor's normalization of a sex that was hetero proclaimed a new heterosexual separatism, an erotic apartheid that forcefully segregated the sex normals from the sex perverts. The new strict boundaries made the emerging erotic world less polymorphous, safer for sex normals.
I imagine that for many people, the most memorable thing about Q, the rabbit, is the introduction of imaginary chimeras, which, fair. Adding JoJo's stands in the final arc of your furry manga is an attention grabber. But instead, I want to highlight chapter 171, where her abuse takes a form that resonates through Legoshi's entire lifetime. Q has convinced Legoshi that he needs to fast in order to grow stronger, but he's struggling to ignore his hunger. This is the scene where we establish that commands work on canines, like with trained dogs.
If you tell a canine to wait, then they'll wait until they die.
The command can't come from just anyone, but if Legoshi trusts the person who says it, then it holds a lot of weight. Unfortunately, he has a history of misplacing his trust. Q tells him to wait, and then she sells the information to Melon about what they're doing. It's here where we confront Legoshi's astounding capacity and conditioned preference for self-denial. The most heart-wrenching detail comes from Legoshi himself, who recalls when his mother once told him to wait. When Gosha and Toki gave birth to Liano, Legoshi's mother, she showed no signs of her mixed wolf and Komodo dragon heritage. When she went on to high school, she decided to stop telling anyone that her father was a reptile, content to live like any pure-blood wolf. She was beautiful and popular, but she had to study canine behavior and perform it deliberately because none of it came naturally to her. Once Leona was an adult, she was horrified to find scales developing under her fur. Fearing that her time was up, she had a quick hookup with a soon-to-be actor and gave birth to Legoshi shortly thereafter. As her scales spread, she lost her ability to pass as a pure wolf and hid herself away in public. Eventually, she couldn't bear to be seen even by her family, refusing to leave her room. Legoshi missed his mother dearly, but he was told to wait, and so he did. For years, the only contact he had with his mother was when she would stroke his face through a hole in the door. One night, she crept into his room while he was sleeping, laid down with him in bed, and hugged him tightly. Once she got up and left the room, she was never seen alive again. She committed suicide that night. The single most brutal panel in the entire series doesn't feature fighting, mutilation, or even tears. It's the reveal that little Legoshi was awake when his mother held him for the last time.
Mom, sometimes I regret what I did that night. If I hadn't held in my feelings, if I'd turned to look at you, I might have been able to stop you from killing yourself.
But he had been told to wait, so he kept still. No one would reasonably blame him for what happened. No one is to blame for another's suicide, especially not a child, but telling yourself that doesn't make the guilt go away. Unfortunately, Legoshi doesn't seem capable of switching it off. His entire personality seems to center around the extent to which he's prone to waiting. Perhaps it's because the first person who gave him the command didn't survive to release him from it, a trauma he has carried with him since childhood.
If you tell a canine to wait, then they'll wait until they die.
Remember what Legoshi's phantom says to him in the original encounter with Haru?
You have struggled your entire life, and now you've reached your limit. You've suppressed your feelings ever since you were a kid, and you lived quietly in the darkness, haven't you? Is that sadness you're feeling, or is it frustration? You longed for this taste for 17 years.
Legoshi has been denying himself, telling himself to wait again and again ever since he was a kid. Back when he was a student, we saw him gazing at an interspecies couple at a restaurant, as if to tell himself everything will be alright if he can just wait until after graduation. But even as an adult, he holds Haru at arm's length, refusing to even kiss her, well past the point where she's grown frustrated by his behavior. He puts her on a pedestal, like she's something that he has to prove himself worthy of, contriving reasons to leave and train himself when all she wants is for him to be there for her. Whenever their relationship threatens to progress, he self-sabotages by blurting something out that will ruin the moment. He does it so many times that even Haru can tell what he's doing.
Kiss me. Here.
211. It's my bank balance. I can't guarantee our future, so I can't just kiss you.
I don't know why you quit school, but I want to keep on seeing you.
I quit school because I ate Louie's leg.
Whatever. I'm not getting sucked into your self-destructive impulses anymore. Whenever things are going well and you're just about to be happy, you flip out and destroy everything.
He remains a virgin, and it's easy to think that he might contrive reasons to stay that way for the rest of his life, which would be fine if that's what he actually wanted, but instead it reads like he's been conditioned to fear anything that might bring him happiness. By the time he meets Q, the connection isn't exactly subtle. When she tells him to wait, he's literally starving himself. She imagines him wasting away until nothing is left, and profits off of his suffering. By the end of his training, Legoshi is isolated from his loved ones behind a door, having seen no one for weeks, much like his mother. But Legoshi isn't alone. Not anymore. It's Haru who finally breaks the spell. When she visits, he finally breaks as fast, and after 173 chapters, they finally kiss. Let me tell you about the time that Legoshi got angry at free dessert. Volume 16 delivers an unexpected gut punch when Juno visits Legoshi at his apartment. She confesses that she's fallen for Louis, and urges Legoshi to advise her on carnivore-herbivore relationships. It's a sweet moment where friends confide in each other and we get to see how Legoshi has matured. But then they go out for dinner. As they walk down the street, both Juno and Legoshi realize that everyone is looking at them differently, with respect and admiration. They're being misperceived as a pure-blood wolf couple, and receiving all the privilege that comes with it. It makes them deeply uncomfortable, and they're both in the process of understanding why. I've heard multiple anecdotes over the years of overweight people who suddenly lost a ton of weight, often in unhealthy ways. There's a reoccurring observation where these people suddenly found themselves treated better in public spaces. Random people were nicer to them, they were served with priority at bars, and so on. Once they realized what was happening, they actually got very angry. It's a crushing realization to come to the understanding that your whole life up to this point has been harder because people's biases have led to you getting worse treatment everywhere you go. And because it was ever present, it's like there was a boot on your neck that was there for so long you ceased to feel it, only noticing it in its absence. This scene can mean a lot of things to different people. Let's talk about couples being visibly gay in public. In a heteronormative society, a straight couple can just stroll into any place they want to and assume that they'll be respected and served. They are given no reason to hide their feelings for each other. For a gay couple, the very act of kissing, holding hands, or showing any sign of affection is essentially a series of increasing risks. Let me reiterate that. Depending on their environment, people in queer relationships have to think about whether it's safe or not before they hold hands in public. Consequences can range from being treated more poorly by the staff to being berated or endangered by bigoted customers, or even just receiving a judging look that serves to remind you that your existence is not universally accepted. This is where passing comes into play. The word passing requires a perceived default, and is used to refer to people who exist outside of that default, but are nonetheless seen, intentionally or not, as a member of that default. If a mixed-race person is perceived to be white by passersby, that person passes as white and may receive very different treatment in public than their own darker-complexioned sibling. If queer people don't dress, act, or otherwise confirm that they're queer, then they may pass as straight and notice themselves being treated differently as a result. This subtle but ever-present societal force is one of the things that keeps gay people in the closet. Until their existence is actively and universally embraced, everyone they meet might pose a threat. Unsurprisingly, this can be enough incentive for many to simply never be true to themselves at all. Find yourself a beard to marry and take your secret to the grave. During his dinner with Juno, Legoshi is being made aware of the boot on his neck through its absence, as the pair is doted on for being such a lovely couple. This is why Legoshi is so mad when they get free dessert, because it only highlights the mistreatment that he had otherwise grown numb to. If you've heard of passing before, it was most likely in discussions of trans people. If you've paid any attention to the news lately, then you don't need me to tell you that trans people haven't exactly been widely accepted in modern society. Like all LGBTQ+ identities, their very existence is politicized, though trans people are the group that has it especially rough right now. Rampant popular scaremongering campaigns have taken root in both the US and the UK, which are based entirely on disinformation and very willful misinterpretation of the facts. Suffice to say, someone who does not transition and remains in their egg, as it is colloquially called, passes as a cis person and receives the benefits of living as such. And the only cost is great emotional anguish. The same can be said for some trans people that get to perform their true gender. After months or years of transition, they may pass in public, as if they were a cis member of that gender, and they may suddenly find themselves in a reprieve from the judgment they've been facing up to that point. Many trans people have no interest in passing at all, and non-binary people don't even have a single gender to pass as to begin with. This is rather brave, because for stupid reasons, to reject the gender binary is to be in conflict with much of modern society. We place a frankly bizarre amount of weight on gender performance, but the extent of that pressure isn't fully felt until you find yourself failing to conform to it. Legoshi's anger during this dinner is given additional weight because we just learned a few chapters ago what happened to his mother. She lived the default life to the fullest. Despite her mixed background, she passed as a beautiful, pure-blood wolf. She was everything that society wanted out of her, and she flourished as a result. After decades of living with the privilege of passing, Liano's reptilian nature became impossible to hide. Losing her ability to pass destroyed her, and her fear of society's judgment led to her suicide. Tragically, she would check her son's face regularly, desperate to reassure herself that he would pass where she did not. The message of this chapter is clear. If Legoshi were to marry Juno, they would have a simple and easy life. If either of them follows their true feelings, there will be pain. And with it, the question of whether it outweighs the love. Juno isn't one to leave this question unanswered. As the pair leave the restaurant, they're interviewed by a reporter looking for on-the-street reactions. He assumes they're a couple, like everyone does. Juno grabs the microphone.
You're a carnivore couple. How does that make you feel?
We're not dating. I'm madly in love with a male deer. If I let the risk scare me, then he'd reject me.
That's all we have to report. Now back to the studio.
Screw what this world thinks. I won't let the likes of you decide what's proper and what makes me happy.
Juno, let's go.
I'll decide what makes me happy.
Legoshi rushes her away from the scene, but by the end of the evening, he's thanking her for taking a stand. Juno put her story on a live news broadcast, and representation matters. It's through the sharing of stories and really listening to them that we can work to subvert the idea of what kind of person serves as the default. Until we can do that, cis heteronormative expectations will always be a crushing weight for those that don't land within them. We're finally rolling up on the end of Beastars, where the story has its final chance to tell us what the point of all this was. We finally get to see Riz again. His tragedy was that while he was suffering at the hands of the state, he was unable to truly connect with another person, despite desperately longing to. The stigma he lived under silenced him, leaving his emotional wounds to fester. In Chapter 182, we finally get to see him again. He's muzzled and shackled in a juvenile detention center, but Pina visits him regularly. They watch videos together on his phone.
Hey, do you think I should get a haircut now? It's getting annoying.
It looks good long.
Then I'll grow it longer.
Say, what happened to the girl you were talking about?
Oh, we broke up 2 days ago. Just get out of prison already. I don't want my first guy friend to be wearing a muzzle forever.
I don't know, man. That sounds a lot like a canonical couple to me. Pina wants to spend more time with Riz, and is even fashioning his hair based on what the bear likes. But regardless, I think this scene is important because it remembers to frame Riz as an actual person. Yes, a man who made mistakes, but also a man with a future. He isn't simply a problem that was solved and can now be thrown away forever. Behaving like that only encourages the same outcome to happen all over again. Not just with Riz, but elsewhere in society. There are countless others who share his fate. But Riz isn't forgotten. Pina puts in the work to keep him in his life. And through Pina, Riz finally has a genuine connection with another man that he isn't just projecting onto the first polite face. This chapter gives us hope towards averting future tragedies like the one that played out in the opening pages of this series. But what about the rest of society? Louis has had one hell of an arc over the course of this series. He started out as an abusive, closeted bully, but he's been coming to terms with his love for carnivores ever since that difficult night with Ibuki and Legoshi. In the second half of the story, he has one-on-one encounters with Legoshi, Haru, and Juno, and at some point it became apparent that he and every single one of his closest friends are all grappling with their queerness. It's almost as if they had been drawn to each other over their shared latent identities. In the meantime, Louis has inherited Horan's conglomerate, and as the company's new CEO, he has one thing that his friends don't: power. Everyone else is just an unemployed or underemployed teenager, but while Legoshi is walking into a hopeless fight, Louis is walking onto a stage. This has been their dynamic from the very beginning, the wolf in the shadows and the deer in the spotlight. Louis' missing foot aches with phantom pains, as it always does when the most important man in his life is in danger. With every camera on him, Louis breaks taboo. He talks about the black market and the quiet struggle he sees in every carnivore in the room.
We should talk to each other more. And when we find ourselves laughing and crying together, we will come to understand that carnivores need to eat meat.
The power goes out in the city after the broadcast, and Gosha and Yahya are sure that there are going to be devourings. In Yahya's most redeeming scene, he walks blindly into the street, offering himself as the first target. But when the lights come back on, everyone's holding hands, having protected each other through the ordeal. There can be a lot of darkness in Beastars, but in its ending, Paru Itagaki makes a clear argument that the people were never the problem. The problem is stigma and the systems that perpetuate it.
Everyone, please, don't turn a blind eye to the black market. It's right there. You have to face reality.
Gosha destroys the gate to the black market, and a mob of carnivores and herbivores walk in together. The carnivores are ashamed to be seen this way. Of course they are. They've been raised to hate this about themselves. But the herbivores are finally truly seeing them for who they are. The two sides unite and tear the whole place down. By the time Legoshi's fight with Melon is nearing its conclusion, its intended purpose has long since expired. There is no black market to fight for. In agitating society's divisions, Melon bet on the darkness of humanity, and he lost. We say goodbye to our characters. Louis is committed to his arranged political marriage, but will always pine for Juno. Yahya retires from being the Beastar. Haru and Legoshi finally get engaged. But most importantly, Gohin, the guardian of the black market, is out of a job. The ending is maybe a little rushed, and it's not entirely clear how the world of Beastars is going to get past its conflicts, but perhaps it's not fair to expect one mangaka to solve all the world's problems, or even those of a fictional one. I think the manga's final message, however, is clear. Stigma, and its shaming of those the world deems to be deviant, is one of life's greatest evils. As complex human beings, we owe each other the effort of understanding one another, but above all, it is systems that perpetuate stigma, and those systems often benefit those that maintain them. It is the duty of those in power to wield that influence to change the world for the better, on behalf of those who are hurting but are robbed of the ability to change it themselves. And if you find yourself with a megaphone, or on a stage, or in a YouTube video, what you say matters. Anyone with an audience is given the chance to lead by example, and there is a very real value in having public figures who are openly queer. People who help their audience feel seen, normalize their identities in a way that pushes back against stigma, and encourages their audience to live as their true selves before it's too late. Well, shit. Well, we're really doing this, aren't we? Let me reintroduce myself. Hello. My name is Keith Ballard. I grew up in California. I wanted to be a game developer, and I got a bachelor's degree in geology. I'm a full-time Let's Player on YouTube, an aspiring video essayist, and a tiny handful of you have been around long enough to have known me for an entire decade now. And I am gay. It's way louder than I thought it was. It's everywhere. So being gay isn't news to me. I've known that I was gay since before any of you even knew that I existed, and that includes all of my closest friends that may be seeing this. There were a lot of reasons that I took so long to finish this video, which I originally meant to put out during Pride Month last year. There were structural problems, I got nervous that I would mishandle some of the more serious subjects and accidentally hurt someone, etc. But chief among the reasons was that as the script got more and more bloated, the shadow of a question grew larger and more demanding, which was, why am I so invested in this? I wasn't always fully aware of this, but the reason this video never got made was because it was waiting for me to come out of the closet. That was a big ask. Yes, because of all the things I've already discussed in this video, but also because I'm a very anxious person. I'm terrified of the idea of doing something that I can't take back. And the moment you tell a single person that you're gay, that's it. Unless they immediately get Final Destinations, my secret is out in the wild forever. That fear has kept me dancing around that point of no return for most of my life. But no, I'm finally done. I think I'm ready to open up the next chapter of my life, for better or worse. I'm here, and I'm queer, and we're all gonna get over it together. But before I move on, there's some stuff I need to admit to about what I've been up to for the last 15 years or so. I've got another confession to make. Oftentimes I'll be on a stream and I'll make certain jokes and eventually someone will ask the question, am I a furry? I generally deflect. After all, we all grew up with a ton of cartoon animal media, and between Beastars, Night in the Woods, Odd Taxi, BoJack Horseman, Black Sad, and Agretzko, we're basically in a golden age for content featuring adult anthropomorphic animal characters. It's an easy defense to make because it's true. There's also the fact that I don't really know what the person asking that question means. What even is a furry? Ask 3 people and you'll get 3 very different answers. I don't think even furries agree. My personal answer is that it's a fandom, so if you participate in the fandom, you're a furry. And if we're going by my definition, then yes, I'm a furry. And I've been one for about half my life at this point. But I think there's another reason why I shrink away whenever somebody asks, because it comes with that tinge of judgment, that stigma that echoes another question that I've feared throughout my entire life. What are you, gay? And the two are more related than you might think. As a teenager, your developing sexuality is a strange, confusing time in your life. That goes double for anyone who falls outside of the heteronormative ideal. It doesn't always get directed precisely at people, but ideas. Lots of odd behaviors that only make sense once I suddenly remember them a decade later. Why have I memorized what page of Game Informer has the Oblivion preview? Why do I want to watch Van Helsing so much? Am I like really into werewolves now? Where else can I find werewolves? Well, in the early 2000s, with the power of that new internet thing, I could basically find infinite pictures of werewolves. Isn't that neat? Never mind that I'm over here looking at werewolves as a teenager when everyone else is looking at women. What could that possibly mean? After all, I wasn't supposed to be looking at men, but werewolves weren't men. They were just fantasy monsters with extremely masculine body types. Nothing to be ashamed of here. Like I said, teenage queerness is only obvious in hindsight. This was back in the dial-up years when the internet was hilariously slow and you couldn't use it at the same time as your landline phone, which was also a thing that people actually used back then. Back then, the internet wasn't this amalgam of centralized platforms. There was no YouTube, no Facebook, or Twitter, or Tumblr. Unless I logged into Diablo 2, I had zero sense of online community. But even back then, there were furries. They're actually older than the popular use of the internet, believe it or not. They used to organize via fanzines in the 80s, and the first furry convention apparently happened in 1989, before I was even born. That is just wild to me. As a teenager, I was endlessly curious, and at some point during high school, I remember that I had this consistent hour-long window where no one else would be home. I ended up spending a decent amount of that time learning about furries, and I've never really stopped. So, yeah, I've been a lurker among the furry fandom since I was in high school. I've never had a fursona, and I never really interacted with anyone, so it might be a bit of a stretch to say I've been a part of the fandom, but I've watched as it morphed from a more open and random thing to like a cottage industry of full-time artists. I saw the rise of adoptables and Your Character Here, and I remember some of the forgotten relics from the past. I've also seen this community catch a lot of shit from the outside over the years, which is part of why I've been ashamed to ever really admit association with it. So, staying true to the themes of this essay, I'm going to try to destigmatize the fandom for you by sharing my story. Maybe I'll even have changed a few minds by the end. I spent my high school years realizing that I was gay, and terrified that anyone would find out. Sure, people loved to sound progressive and claim that society was very accepting and inclusive now, but that turned out to be a lie. California has this proposition system that's meant to allow the people to propose and vote on laws directly, and it's basically a train wreck for reasons I do not have time to get into here. There was a brief window where gay marriage was actually legal in the state, but when I was 18 years old, Proposition 8 made it into the ballots. It was the proposition to ban same-sex marriages in California. I was pissed. I finally had a car of my own, but I didn't really want to drive it anywhere because everywhere I went, there were more of those stupid fucking blue and yellow signs that were challenging my rights as a human being. But I still wasn't ready for what came next. More than 7 million people voted in favor of Prop 8. It passed, and I wouldn't be that afraid of the results of another vote until Donald Trump was elected president 8 years later.
And your brother wanted to tell you that he was gay, didn't he?
He thought that we would hold that against him and not let my children be around him.
Why do you think he thought that?
It never would have happened, I'll tell you that.
Can I tell you, if I were your brother, I would have been afraid to tell you too, because of stuff like this. Because this is what you're focused on. This is the legislation you want to put forward. I was afraid of people like you growing up, and for 18 years, I walked around with nice people like you, who took me to ball games, who told me how smart I was, and who went to the ballot and voted for crap like this.
Votes like that were a reminder that I wasn't welcome here. At least not fully. I had mathematical evidence that when I was in a given room, there was a good chance that someone near me hated who I was and voted against the idea that I deserved equal rights. Worst of all, no one knew I was gay, so I couldn't even talk about what I was going through with anyone. This was, of course, during those peak teenage hormone years where every emotion is hitting you harder than normal, so I was basically angry all the time. Oh, and my parents were also getting a divorce that year, so fuck me, I guess. So, enter the furries. At a time where I was deeply unhappy, and the world was looking pretty fucking bleak, there were all these creators being unabashedly gay online. It might be hard to imagine now since so many YouTubers are openly queer these days, but that was not at all the vibe on the internet back then. YouTube was basically just John and Hank Green and a bunch of other people that we do not talk about anymore because they really did not age well. Tumblr had only just been created and was nowhere near becoming the specific community that we all think of it as, but the furries were an ever-present force that was basically this quote personified.
I reject your reality and I substitute my own.
Furpiled by Leo Magna, previously Arthur Husky, was a slice-of-life webcomic that ran from 2004 to 2011, and it might have been the first piece of media I ever engaged with where gay characters could just exist. It follows a group of friends that go through all of the melodramatic arcs you're used to seeing from straight stories, except they weren't straight. And let me tell you, if anyone ever tells you that representation in media doesn't matter, they have no idea what they're talking about. This goofy webcomic did so much to make me feel less alone, and I remember refreshing that Web 1.0 ass page obsessively for months to see if he would ever resolve the love triangle cliffhanger where Saito punched the fridge. Speaking of love triangle furry webcomics from high school, while I was writing this I saw this tweet. If you recognize this panel, you may apply for a senior discount. Oh no, it's me. I recognize this panel. My youth is but a memory, and my corporeal form is fast becoming dust to be ground beneath the gears of history. Life is but a blink in the unknowable scale of cosmic existence, etc. But then what happened next was fantastic. The original creator of the comic, which was called Closet Coon, responded with the original sketch. And then everyone kinda lost their shit. Profile after profile responded, everyone just wanting a chance to thank Leaf Dog for playing an important part in helping them figure themselves out when they were growing up gay, or making them feel less alone in a scary world. I think that's honestly what the majority of the community is, people who needed to feel like they belonged. Unsurprisingly, that means a lot of gay and trans folks. People who have been punished for being themselves in the real world, or have remained in the closet for fear of what might happen if they ever revealed themselves. In the meantime, they've taken refuge in one of the most inclusive communities in the world, one which accepts them for who they are. A friend of mine who makes a living as a furry artist summarized this fantastically.
Honestly, my favorite thing about the community is just the huge variety of people within it and just how normal it is to be different.
In 2020, the International Anthropomorphic Research Project determined that only 20% of the furry community is heterosexual. When they conducted that same survey online, the percentage of exclusive heteros dropped to 10%.
Have you heard of the worldwide phenomenon known as furries?
I'm not gay.
I am.
Oh, we are.
You guys are gay? Fuck.
Even if we assume these stats have a margin of error, the furry community being 80 to 90% gay, bisexual, pansexual, or asexual is a staggering place to land. For reference, Gallup researchers claimed in 2020 that only 5.6% of United States adults identified as LGBTQ+, and that number was seen as a large increase. Similarly, the IARP found that 12.5% of furries are trans, which is absolutely astronomical compared to Gallup's 2021 estimate that 0.7% of Americans are trans. The IARP further corroborates the connection between furries and queerness by claiming that non-straight furries are more likely to identify more strongly as furries with other furries and with their fursonas. This inspired me to do my own bunk science, so I asked my Twitter following whether there's any community that they could think of that is less cis-hetero than furries. I only really got two answers, one being the LGBTQ+ community, which, fair, I guess. The other was speedrunners. This made me laugh, so I made a poll asking whether furries or speedrunners are less cis-het, and obviously furries won, but speedrunners still took a quarter of the votes? What have I been missing? How queer are speedrunners? Anyway, because of my own life experiences and the path that I took to figuring myself out, whenever I see furry stuff online, it gives me that little spark of joy because it helped me get through some really shitty times, and it's kind of forever linked to my own queerness on an emotional level. It's why I collect these little statues and why I'm happy to make an anthro character in Final Fantasy XIV or Dungeons & Dragons, and why I prioritize watching something like Odd Taxi over whatever else people are recommending to me at that time. I'm also happy to report that the furry community has only grown in the years since. There are countless creators that are carrying the torch that was passed on by Furpiled and Closet Coon. A personal favorite of mine is Duncan and Eddie, a cute and funny weekly comic about an alligator and a goat that are boyfriends. The arc about Eddie's coming out was brutal, with these scenes where everything is monochrome while he's in straight mode. with messages from his boyfriend causing these glimpses of vibrant color and light. I've also enjoyed following Angelo Falls, a trans man who created a fictional wrestling league that seems to be populated entirely by trans masked wrestlers. They stand triumphantly, both in the ring and on magazine covers, celebrating their victories while displaying top surgery scars to the world, unashamed. It's a celebration of something that's worth celebrating. The creator is clearly putting the energy that he wants to see into the world, and by sharing his work online, he can reach more trans men that really need to see it. This is also why I ask that you think twice before mocking the fandom in the future, because now you know that they are this disproportionately marginalized group of people that have been hurt before and found community together, taking comfort in each other against a hostile world. At some point, you have to ask yourself if it's really funny anymore. Like, I remember making attack helicopter jokes a long time ago, but that habit vanished overnight the moment I understood who they were really making fun of. Most people don't really want to be cruel, and the rest, I ban. That's not to say you can't laugh with furries. Frankly, they're fucking hilarious. A lot of what they're doing is really weird, and most of them seem to have a pretty healthy sense of humor about the whole thing. I'm on furry Facebook, which is a thing. A lot of them are huge nerds, and they've developed their own entire language of memes and in-jokes just like any other group. Is being a furry cringe? Absolutely. The cringe is compulsory, the inevitable byproduct of sincerity. If you can't have sincerity, tear it all down. You failed. Start over. But most people can tell the difference between when someone's laughing with them versus laughing at them. Maybe try to talk to a few so you don't end up sounding embarrassingly unhinged like this woman.
There are kids that identify as a furry, a cat or a dog, whatever. At least one of our schools in our town has in one of the unisex bathrooms, a litter box for the kids that identify as cats.
Holy shit. No, ma'am. That's not even remotely what furries are. And what you're describing has never happened before. For those keeping score at home, that was actually 2 counts of transphobia. One for the fear-mongering about gender-neutral bathrooms, don't think I didn't catch that. And another for spreading fantastical lies about people identifying as increasingly confusing things. The narrative here is that if we allow a world where a boy can turn out to be a girl, then what's stopping her from being a cat? And then democracy and the American family are doomed, I guess. I hate it here. Seriously, you can just talk to a furry. It's actually pretty easy. In fact, in the lead up to finishing this essay, I took it upon myself to interact with more furries directly. What I very quickly learned is that when they're given the anonymity that's provided by a username and a cartoon character, they can be astonishingly honest. You can be only a couple messages deep into a conversation, and then suddenly they're admitting things about themselves that most wouldn't tell their closest friends. It certainly takes some getting used to, but there's almost something aspirational about how frankly they'll discuss the details of what they do and don't like.
That's disgusting. It was beautiful. You Earthers have hang-ups.
Oh, speaking of which, I found the furries in Beastars. There's a club in Volume 15 where everyone wears animal masks. Well, animals other than the species that they already are. And much like with real-life furries, this anonymity leads to a whole lot more honesty and dropped inhibitions. In a series nearly devoid of explicit queerness, we suddenly have 2 masked women getting handsy with each other in a booth.
There are no rules stipulating that females may only love males.
We then see Legoshi, and of course he's wearing a deer mask. He dances with Yahya, who claims that a gay couple won't stand out as much as a heterosexual one here. With those words, Yahya is signifying that this is an explicitly queer space. This scene is significant because even if you ignore all of the more indulgent interpretations of the series, Beastars is explicitly about deviancy, passing, and stigma. So it's kind of a big deal to establish a place in this world where, when gifted with anonymity, a surprising number of people are gay. Even Paru Itagaki herself wears a mask, always making public appearances as Legom. She knows the value of being able to express yourself more authentically by hiding your identity. I'm kind of fucking that all up for myself, aren't I, by talking about all this? I'm telling you the value of the thing that I'm losing in the telling. I can't exactly go back, so I hope this video helped someone. Speaking of which, bro, where's that fursona? I'm actually really nervous to record this, but alright, I guess we're doing this. Welcome to my fur affinity gallery. This part's not scripted, and I'll try not to let it go on for too long, but I guess I just wanted you to feel me, and not just have me like be going filtered through a script and the whole recording process that kind of like flattens things a bit. But like, I'm excited about this. Like, this is cool. So Peter Donahue kickstarted his print of his volume 2 for Rudek and the Bear. And as a little perk, if you got at a certain tier, you could just kind of have your character drawn in there. And I didn't have a character, so I just was like, hey, brown hyena? And I just thought that'd be fun because I'd been discovering them recently and thought they were cool and interesting little creatures. And then there he was. I got the book, and right in the middle of the page was this brown hyena character attributed to me. And I just thought that was like, immediately I was like, I want to see him more. What's that little dude's story? What's he up to? And so when I decided to take the plunge and I was designing my character with Enro, that was the starting point we went with. And then we ended up with Marrow here. This is my dude. I love him. It's hard to explain if you don't have like any kind of inherent attachment to this kind of stuff, but like, I think he's a super cool character and I'm really happy with how he turned out. Like, I got the starting sketch for him a while ago, and I remember that it was a raid night, and I didn't care how much we were wiping because I had the sketch on my entire vertical monitor on my other screen, and I would just kind of just keep looking back at it whenever we were not fighting bosses and so on. Like, I got him, he's got his little, like, the Koof is there, there's the Tragedian from Pathologic, there's the cover of Doolittle, the Pixies, like I got a few little pins here and there. He's got this like, comment, survive mug, which is, yes, a Game Grumps reference again, but it's also just like a fantastic slogan for a hyena YouTuber to have. Also, a lot of people design these like super buff characters with a million abs and so on, but like, I don't know, I kind of want to just like work on my own like body image issues and so on, and kind of like normalize seeing myself the way I am, and as contradictory as that might seem on an animal character. So like, this whole area is just based on like photo references, like it's just a realistic recreation of what I look like. That's kind of like the vibe I wanted to go for, and I'm really happy with how that turned out. And also, like, as cliche as the whole like don't talk to me until I've had my coffee like expression idea thing is, like, I wanted him to be off-putting. There's this whole thing I'm self-conscious of where I'm this massive goofball weirdo around like the 5 people I'm really comfortable with, but for the rest of society I'm like this incredibly awkward, weird person. But I'm also very large, so like it kind of it's not a comfortable interaction a lot of times whenever I'm just in public and I'm not like acclimating well. I've described him as being this like accidentally rude person because he's kind of speed running through social interactions that make him feel uncomfortable. And I wasn't sure how it was going to come across, but like a lot of people seem to like him because that whole thing is actually apparently a really, really relatable thought. Honestly, I really underestimated how happy having a character would make me. And now I'm really like diving into commissions and having fun getting more and more art because like I guess I've been waiting to do this for over a decade. So here we have, it's Marrow with Odessa, which is Stephanie's goat character. This is a nice little post-apocalyptic looking scene because I'm a fan of like The Walking Dead and The Last of Us and that kind of like setup. And so we have an ambiguous bad things happening in the woods kind of setup here. And I really love the color here. And this absolutely made my day. I made my gallery a while back and put the first 2 pieces up. And then Bonbons, someone who was just a complete stranger to me, just made fan art of my character that day and just gifted it to me. Like, that was just completely out of the blue. This was just from a stranger to a stranger, and it was like it was just an incredibly nice thing to do. This is super well drawn, both catching like the character's appearance and like personality in a cool way. This one's a lot of fun. When I look through somebody's commission sheet and I see that they have an experimental bracket, that's always really interesting to me because that's like, you're just going to get something. It's going to be expressive and it's going to be colorful, and you're not going to be quite sure what it's going to look like until it just kind of comes out, because there usually isn't even like a drafting process, because you're just giving them artistic freedom to go wild. I am so happy with how this one turned out. I reached out to the artist that did the art for Armello and Ghost of a Tale. He's got like this whole roster of characters, but most recently he's been drawing a lot of Brasa here. This wolf that he made up so that he could draw more capoeira poses and try out those different things. And like, he's so good at dynamic poses and anatomy and expressions and slapstick and comedy and so on. Like all of his pieces are just really fun to look at. And so when he actually responded, when I asked about a commission, I was like, all right, well, I got to see if he'll let me do a sequence where it's just Marrow trying to learn capoeira from Brasa. And of course it's not going to go well, but that's the point, because I want to just see it completely fall apart. And it came out so well, and then it goes significantly worse in part 2. I could not be happier with the result, but a real treat here was the fact that he would come in and show me a work in progress like every other day or so in my Twitter DMs, and so on random evenings and mornings, I would just get hit by this big dopamine spike where I would just see another work in progress of the sequence and just get really excited about it all again. Anyway, thanks for indulging me. That's all the art I've got so far. I've got more coming already, and if you want to draw Marrow, absolutely go for it. I just love seeing him around. It's great. Yeah, I can say pretty certainly, like, this is just, it's what makes me happy, and so I'm gonna keep doing it. I am so done giving a shit about people that will judge me for this. And for that matter, my favorites gallery is public, so you can go browsing through here and you can see just like a bunch of cool art by a bunch of cool artists that I've just been finding. There are so many artists. It's astonishing. All right, that's enough. Back to scripted me to wrap this all up. I probably don't need to explain what kept me in the closet all this time because I basically just made a 3-hour video about that. But what changed? Why come out now? It's hard to say exactly, but I think a lot of variables were at play. First of all, representation matters. A lot of creators that I watch have come out as trans lately. And while I'm not trans, watching a lot of people that I respect take that irreversible plunge that I was so afraid of meant a lot to me. I've also been receiving a new volume of the Beastars manga every 2 months since I finished watching Season 1, and in Volume 13 and 15 we have multiple instances of Legoshi coming out to people. He just does it. He blurts it out mid-conversation as if he's even surprising himself.
I've been in love with a female rabbit for a long time. I blurted out my secret before you told me yours. It's a relief to get that off my chest. Bye.
It's as if he understands that if he lets himself think about it, he'll never say it, and so he just does it.
They must think that you're threatening me just because you're a wolf and I'm a rabbit.
I'm in love with your daughter.
By the time Legoshi's in the nightclub with Yahya, he just seems so much more comfortable with himself. His life never got easy, but it's like we're finally looking at someone that grew into their own fully realized person.
This might sound weird, but obviously I have a thing for herbivores. So my body doesn't react to females if I can't tell what species they are.
That's your fetish?
It's like he's finally done the hard part enough times that it's lost its bite, and with it, the weight that it held over his life. But the final straw for me? I was having a pretty bad week back in January where I could barely sleep most nights. During this time, I ended up playing what has turned out to be the most emotionally devastating video game that I've ever played. But that's a topic for a future video. Maybe even the next one. It was a profoundly queer story, and not just because most of the characters were gay. What really hit me, the thought that it finally helped me process with all of its ugliness, is that there will never be a right time. If I keep waiting for the world to feel ready for me, I'll die in the closet. So I followed Legoshi's lead, basically. I didn't plan the day that I would come out. I didn't wake up that morning and think, yes, today is the day that I tell my friends I'm gay. I just found myself typing it into a group chat all of a sudden, and then I hit enter before I could stop myself. I told 5 people over the course of an hour, and I've been slowly telling more people ever since. And you know what? It feels good. And I can only hope that that feeling in my chest, the feeling of being honest about myself, is worth any hardship that it will cause. If you're cis and straight and don't understand what I'm talking about here, please, I beg you to talk to more queer people. We like to think that we're living in a progressive society and that things are always getting better. And in some ways that's true. But things are often really fucking dire from our perspective. Over the course of writing this, I've been coming to terms with the fact that Californians traumatized me with Prop 8 as a teenager in a way that I've never fully recovered from over a decade later. And I'm currently watching that cycle repeat itself. As I'm writing this, Florida is advancing a so-called Don't Say Gay bill that bans all LGBTQ+ discussions in schools. This is already horrifying, damaging, and alienating to so many children, but the worst came on February 21st. A new amendment to the bill would require that schools inform parents if a child was discovered to be gay, a rule that would put many children in danger. The amendment was withdrawn only a day later, but by then the damage was already done because the message behind it was sent. Texas has declared all gender-affirming healthcare for trans youths to be child abuse, and is requiring everyone to report such instances to the state under threat of criminal prosecution. The very existence of trans kids is illegal in the state of Texas. A whole new generation of queer kids is once again being traumatized when they discover that the adult world is hostile to their very existence. Just like me, many of today's young people are learning to only allow their true selves to come out online, be it through the furry fandom or otherwise. So, if admitting who I am can increase queer visibility, while also working to destigmatize one of the few communities where these young people can feel safe, so be it. I'm gay, and I'll take furry as a compliment. Wow, it's actually finished. I've been working on this for so long that I don't know what I'm going to do with myself after. If you like this video, please click on all the buttons, comment, and subscribe. I worked really hard on it. Today's my birthday, so the comment writes itself. Thank you to all these YouTubers that helped voice characters and whatnot. I got a lot more responses than I was expecting. Being able to cast some people as characters that match their personas was a highlight. I shouldn't have to say this, but if you don't like something about this video, don't bother them. Do you think they had time to read a 33,000 word script? I wrote a novella. I barely had time to read it. Thank you to my friends for being the kind of people that I felt safe coming out to. Thank you to Somatul and Enro for some very long conversations. I promise we'll play Monster Hunter again soon. And thank you to my Patreon supporters for enabling my very weird job where I can just decide to work on something like this on the side for months if I want to. See you guys next time. Also, speedrunners as the gayest community? Come on, man, you gotta get your head in the game. It's obviously pathologic. Think about it. Y'all completely whiffed on that one.